Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back. Let's dive right into the business side of the house. We're going to go right to the Black Rifle Coffee website. Two things on the rotating banner for today. One is the coffee club subscription that I talk about all the time. Get the coffee you want, delivered on the frequency you want, at the volume you want, wherever you want to. And then the second one, it just rotated, is the newest video from BRCC Presents, The Siege at Khe Sanh. And I don't have the words to describe the wheelbarrow required to carry these men's balls as they walk, so there's not sparks coming from the brass. Click on the video and just stand by for an amazing story. As we slide down, as usual, we have this bar that you can slide over to the left here. Wow, look at that. All the light roasts. It looks like the lightest is the Silencer Smooth. Let's crank the other direction. What is the darkest roast that Black Rifle Coffee offers? Well, Murdered Out Roast, extra dark. There you go. For me, I'm more of a person in the middle. Let's see where that lands. The 5-alarm roast, that's really good. Thin Blue Line roast, look at that. You could sit there and support whatever version of first responder that you want. Just Black is great. The Freedom Roast, all of those are delightful. As you scroll down, apparel, gear, coffee bundles, and the coffee sampler, things I've definitely talked about in the past. Those things are great for gifts. And then the best sellers, looks like it's specifically this week, just on the roasts. And then, of course, links to the social and an ability to sign up for their email list if you want to. And that is kind of what's going on the Black Rifle website for today. And that's it. They make this podcast possible. I tell people this all the time. The best thing you can do to support the podcast is support the brands that I work with. I don't just take anybody on board that is interested. You know, Evan and the people behind Black Rifle, they've been friends of mine for a really long time. And actually, that's why I'm involved with them. I love their coffee. I love having a coffee shop, but it's the people behind it. Speaking of people, let's talk about our guest today. His name is Tom Opre. And it's awesome because he just had to make a short drive down from a little bit north here in Montana. He's local to the Valley. I'd heard about him quite a bit. We had been briefly connected before. And I'm just going to read to you here his bio because he's been at what he does for a long time. He's a film director, a cinematographer, television producer, and a wildlife conservationist. Our conversation today definitely focused on conservationism through the lens of hunting specifically, but even more, he ended up talking a lot about Scotland, which is his recent film, and I won't even try to unpack it because he gets into it. It's called Killing the Shepherd. The decisions that human beings make. It's amazing how we think we know what is best in the universe and that we know how to best regulate nature by throwing the levers of turning things on and turning others off. And I'm not so sure that we do. I think people, for the most part, have the best of intents, but oftentimes I just think the downstream or unintended consequences can be pretty severe. So Tom has made educating the public on wildlife conservation and stewardship an issue of main priority for him. Since 1990, Tom has produced and or directed national television commercial projects for Fortune 500 companies, feature films, and episodic television, including wildlife projects for Discovery Channel and PBS. 2015, he wrapped up a 7-year primetime run on NBC Sports. God, he had some crazy stories about the shit that they covered. And today he serves on the nonprofit board for the African Children's School and Shepherds of Wildlife Society. For whatever reason, the tail 10 minutes of this episode, the audio that you're hearing through this microphone dropped for whatever reason. So the last 10 minutes is going to be a little bit of a different audio experience. I'm just telling you that now. But it's all captured and it's there and it's the last 10 minutes. So if you get that far, just stay with us. Episode number 321 with Montana native and local Tom Opre. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north or south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. Get cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
And a television spot for this film, and a friend of mine, Ashton Smith, did the voiceover. Ashton Smith is the voice of God. He had 3 Super Bowls, including Top Gun Maverick commercials that he did the voiceover on.
Really?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite movies. My wife hates Top Gun Maverick.
No, it's really well done.
I took her to the theater twice to see it. The second time definitely could be described as non-consensual. She went and of course, it was still very popular at the time. We were in the front row and she wasn't having it.
Yeah.
I keep telling her, it's a national hero. We have to celebrate our heroes. And she keeps trying to tell me he's not real.
Well,
Looks fucking real to me.
No, it's pretty damn believable, actually. So,
how did you get into filmmaking?
you know, that's a great question. You know, my dad wrote for Outdoor Life and Field and Stream for 30 years.
Okay.
About the outdoors, the environment, all that stuff.
And we're talking like at the mailbox every month, new issue coming.
Yeah, you go down and get it off the rack at the grocery store. You know, everybody's got to have one. You know, I think it's also when they actually put out Playboy, everybody had one in the house too, right? So
it was, what was it, a week ago? I was asking him if he'd ever seen a Playboy. Oh. He's never seen one in the wild?
Oh,
Nope.
I feel sorry for you.
No Hustler. I was like, have you ever gone into a gas station and seen? And he's just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, thank the internet for all that.
Well, I bet the internet, I mean, how is the Outdoor Field and Stream? Are they even doing print copy anymore?
Well, interesting enough, I just saw a post today. You know, the company bought them some years ago. It used to be totally separate, different companies, and the publishers were. And the last time I remember, it was a company called Times Mirror owned them in New York, and then eventually got sold, and they got actually bought by one entity that took them both together, but still produced two different magazines.
Yeah.
But then they went digital here, and then everything was digital. I literally just saw a post today from the hunting editor of Outdoor Life, or I think Field and Stream hunting editor, who said, "Yep, the new guy has said that this is going to go back to print, and it's his passion." So that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I wonder what the future of publishing is. I mean, it's certainly easier to carry more stuff on your device. Mm-hmm. It's a different experience for me, though. But my generation was probably the last one that will be born with the option.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, the internet, I remember the first time I used the internet in like 95. It was at a computer class at my high school. And I'm going to be honest, I looked up titties. You know, like if the internet is there, I was 17. I wasn't the only one looking up titties either. I mean, our teacher would put up, like, I think we were supposed to do, I don't know, we were making like chat rooms and stuff like that, which is also a horrendous idea for young adults of 15 to 18 years old with unfettered access to the internet. I just learned a little bit more about anatomy, I think, in that class than anything else. But I mean, I loved books. I still do actually love books because I think I grew up with them in magazines. I remember the paper catalogs for models, like the old glue, gray ones. You had to pick them off and like shave off. And I remember we were actually living in Montana. I was very young. We lived in Missoula for a couple of years. And I remember going and chasing down the mailman. Like hey, did I get a package? Did I get a package? But it all came from cutting out what I wanted, putting it in an envelope, sending it off. My kids are just, everything's on their phone.
Yeah, and everything in the digital world is on your phone or on your device. But I think there is a movement now. I see LPs, right? Vinyl. There's a real big movement out there to have something physical in their hands. You know, the movies we make DVDs and Blu-rays. You know, not a lot of them, but there are people that say, yeah, I'd like to have one.
What would be the size of your market? Making those things, I think, is awesome. And I don't know if I would have been able to call the vinyl. I mean, certainly when it went from, you know, I remember... Michael, did you ever use a portable CD player?
Actually, yes, but it was in grade school.
Okay. Yeah. So he just, like, his life and our life, ours is awesome. I'm just trying to turn him and expose him to things he's missing out on. I remember doing training runs on the beach with a CD player in my hand, trying to hold it steady so it wouldn't skip to the point where it was like messing up my gait. And then I remember when the first iPod came out, and then I'm surprised that vinyl made a resurgence. I wasn't into vinyl, but I mean, with the way the technology is going, I think it's very cool. I think it's that people are celebrating those things. I wouldn't have called it. I remember we had a Blu-ray and DVDs and going and seeing things in the theater, and now it's just an app. I'm curious what size of your audience is actually consuming them, DVD versus Blu-ray versus download.
It's a real small portion of the business. Almost everything is streaming online.
Are they evolving DVD anymore, or is that kind of just and Blu-ray?
Yeah, I think it's they're utilizing the technology they had, and that's where it stands.
Man, I wonder if it'll ever come back.
But with LPs, I mean, you got it's that aura of hearing the music.
It does sound different.
It's a totally different experience than watching something that's digitally created. I mean, we just got done making the music for this film. I hired a composer in the Isle of Skye, a guy named Paul Munsey, and Paul spent 15 years in LA working for a guy named Danny Elfman, who did most of the Avenger films.
Yeah, I've seen his name on a lot of stuff.
Exactly. And Paul did a short animated film in 2020 that won the Academy Award for Best Animated Film. And so, you can use this digital library of footage that's out there and music, and it works. But boy, it's like forcing a peg through a round hole, right?
Yeah.
You really got to work at it to make it work.
For a guy like Danny Elfman, I mean, his chops have been established. Do production houses come to him and just say, just do you?
Well,
give us some Danny Elfman. Like, how much are they in there? Like, no, maybe go like to G minor.
Yeah, well, you got the way the relationship works is you have a director. This director has this vision for what. So he hires all these key people. So director of photography, that's the look at the film.
Yeah.
He's going to hire the editor. He wants him to cut the editor, or she wants him to cut the editor a certain way. Same thing with a music composer. If you hire Williams or any number of the top A-list guys, if they work for you, they're not cheap.
Yeah.
But they bring their own piece of this into it. That's the one thing about filmmaking. It's assembly by crowdsourcing. You got all these different people from the production working on it. And you have all these different positions that have been created over the millennia of filmmaking. Your production assistant has a very specific job. Your assistant directors, all the way through post-production and VFX directors and all the things, all special effects we got going on now. So it's interesting to see because everybody brings something to the party. And hopefully it's really good, and usually it is. And that's the cool thing about when you finally see as a director a film completed, and you've got all these key people that have all brought something worthwhile to it, and it's magical.
Just imagine Danny Elfman sitting there just whipping his conducting sticks and having a director say, hey, what do you think about this? Just the side eye that might.
Most of my work has been small, short format stuff, mostly TV commercials and extreme sport films and all that kind of stuff. So I think this film right here is my second feature-length documentary film. And so when we worked with Paul, I said, hey, Paul, I mean, this is going to be my first time that I'm going to let someone like you just write all the music.
Yeah.
And so we spent a lot of time going back and forth. I had a couple pints in the Isle of Skye with him when we were over there last year, and then gave him a lot of notes. And it's like, okay, if I'm overstepping my bounds, let me know. But I'm not a brand new director. Obviously, I've been doing this for a while, getting a little long in the tooth, in fact. But the reality is every time you have a new experience, you don't want to come in it like you know everything. It's always better to come in and say, you know what, I'm just gonna be honest. I don't have the breadth of experience you have working with all the directors you've worked with. Teach me.
Best leaders I've ever been around never tried to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
They tried to staff the room with really smart people.
Well, also some of the smartest people, I think it was Ronald Reagan, said a lot of great things can be accomplished if no one cares who gets the credit.
Yeah, man, that is a tough optic in today's world.
Very tough, very tough. And it's definitely part of what I deal with every day. So.
Yeah. So how did you get into filmmaking? I think
so we're getting in that. So we basically, my dad used to make some outdoor films in the 1960s, early 70s. I grew up in Michigan. My dad worked for the newspaper in Detroit, the Free Press, and wrote about the outdoors. And so I had a pretty blessed childhood, being able to go fishing and hunting, and we filled our freezer full of wild game all the time, and it just was a great experience. And when I saw these films, I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. My dad didn't keep it up. He went on to other things. And so when he wasn't around, I'd sneak into his office. And this is back in the day of 16 millimeter film. So we're seeing a projector, and you got to put these roll of film up. You got to get the sprockets lined up. You got to thread it onto the intake reel, and then you flip the switch, and it's, like we all have heard about.
And if you messed up that actual film,
well, you could be in a little bit of trouble. Dad probably would not be happy. But these were, he had a whole bunch of different prints of these films there. So I get up there, and it was cool stuff. I mean,
how did they make copies of the 16 millimeter film? Well,
it's just like you made the film. You take the film, and you take another piece of film that matches that amount of film you have there, and you expose it.
Wow.
And it's a process that laboratories could, they would basically create a duplicate
so
of it.
So it was at least possible to have duplicates. So
yeah. Well, so you got to remember, they had to send the films out to the theaters,
That's
right?
true. Okay. All right.
So, and every film theater got a 35 millimeter millimeter print,
Okay.
and, with mag strip on it. So that's kind of, I started doing it that way. I got involved, and I said, wow, that's kind of cool. I'd like to do that someday. And then went to college, played football, and ended up working on PBS at a station there at our university. And after that, I was like, well, okay, this is kind of cool to me. I was in Detroit, so I said, let's go try this Detroit thing out. So I worked on a whole bunch of corporate video stuff for Chevrolet and GM truck and bus outfits, and did motorsports. I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. All right, so run around all these different tracks, the Indy, the 24-hour Rolex races, all
So
kinds
you're
of stuff,
creating
NASCAR.
content for them, or recording on them?
Yeah, and that was actually creating content for them. That was all the big deal. They wanted, they're sponsoring all this stuff
Yeah.
where their cars are being involved, and so yeah, it was really kind of a cool deal to get involved. But there really wasn't a whole lot going on in Detroit. Money wasn't really great, and Detroit, it's kind of a one-horse town. When the auto industry sucks, everything sucks. And so I had just gotten out of college and basically packed up and moved to Florida because an old friend of my father's used to make a bunch of outdoor TV shows back in the day when outdoor TV was really cool. I'm talking like, Kurt Gowdy type, cool stuff at ABC Wild World Sports. And so I ended up going down there and working for him for a little bit. Ended up getting on my first feature film, which was a Vietnam film about the Bobby Garwood, the last American POW is what it was called. Worked with Martin Sheen on that film and Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid, trying to resurrect his career at that time.
Do you realize how old he is?
Oh, well, he was older than me. I was just a kid then. So.
He's in his 60s.
Is he really?
I saw a random snippet, and he was a guest on a talk show, and the guy asked him how old he was. I would have guessed 45. He's in his 60s.
Well, he's got good genetics then, doesn't he?
I mean, genetics, and also, I've heard some people in Hollywood have good connections to people that can extend your genetics, if you know what I mean.
If you got enough money, you can make a lot happen. Yeah. So I worked on that movie, and it was kind of my first, foray into the feature film business. I ended up working on a few things, including one of the Iron Eagle movies.
Okay.
Working with Louis Gossett, and I got exposed to some pretty cool stuff, but decided it really wasn't the lifestyle for me. When you're doing feature films for Hollywood, especially on locations, it's 6 days a week.
Yeah.
And you're working long hours. The money's not bad. Notoriety's kind of cool. Work with some cool people, but it's a pretty much a grind, and it wasn't kind of I'd say it's probably the family life that I was looking for. At that time, I was still young and dumb and trying to absorb everything I could like a sponge, and worked for some great people. Learned lots of really good information about how to be a good filmmaker on the backside of things, production and management. And then from there, I did a Shark Week for Discovery Channel. Just some buddies of mine got picked up to do this thing called the Great Shark Hunt, and for Discovery Channel. And
Did you have any experience with sharks before this?
No, I had none.
That's what I'm talking about.
I think I was 23 years old, and I was working on Iron Eagle 3 in Tucson at the time, and I got this phone call from my buddy. Said, "Hey, I need a producer." I said, "Well, I can produce for you, okay." And a guy named Jordan Klein, and it's pretty funny because Jordy, as he goes by, his dad, Jordan Sr., who's still like at 100 right now, still alive, got the DGA Lifetime Achievement Award. He's the guy that designed all the underwater sets and all that stuff for Thunderball. If you guys remember the James Bond movie there, they shot in that's the one where
there's been a couple underwater scenes. Is that the one where they all skydived in?
Not skydived down. This is where that British bomber, they stuck it, they planted it in the water outside of Nassau that had a nuclear bomb on it. And then
Michael, pull that shit up.
Yeah. So that's what his father had worked on. As a matter of fact, my buddy Jordy, he'd actually been on.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah. So all those little scooters there, my buddy Jordan's father designed and built all those for the movie.
Did he do all that from scratch?
All from scratch. Matter of fact, I think they still have a couple of them hanging up in their hangar down in Ocala, Florida right now.
You know what's wild is that a lot of people think that this is probably what being a SEAL would be like.
Yeah.
Like this is, we're down there with like a K-bar. Actually, couldn't be in your teeth because you have your regulator in. But yeah, just dodging darts and scuba tanks and he got me.
Yeah. A little bit different, I think. So.
Well, what's wild too is, having all these people underwater doing this is one thing. All of like the cameras needing to be down there too, and the safety mechanism, the safety divers, and all of the things that are off. Man, got a helicopter and everything. Yeah, get him, James.
Yeah. The one thing about making films, though, is that when you get on the water, that's like being in the mountains. Everything takes 2 to 3 times longer.
Yeah.
And so when you're trying to make a production, you got to anticipate all this stuff because time is money. And when you've got
the water eats a lot of expensive equipment.
Well, it can. Yeah, the nice thing about what these guys did, my buddies, they actually built their own underwater housing, some of the very first motion picture housings in the business.
That's so wild.
So it was pretty cool to work with those people. So we
Yeah.
did this thing called the Great Shark Hunt, and it was about how man was pretty well mucking up the world's shark populations by over-harvesting them. And it ended up being the highest rated in the history of Discovery Channel's whole channel at that point in time, which I think this was 94.
Were they harvesting to eat them, or were they cutting their fins?
Cutting the fins. It was
Yeah.
finning. So, yeah, we
For
actually
dick
went into-
pills.
Well, no. So shark fin soup is considered a delicacy in the Asian Orient. So I don't.
Not the rest of the shark.
No, it's awful what would happen, but
Yeah.
it's Discovery's actually come to me and said, "Hey, do you guys think about wanting to do another one?" I said, "Well, it's been 30 years, so
I feel like they haven't stopped doing that
they haven't.
either.
So, but it's changed a little bit. Now it's all about blood and guts in the water, and feeding sharks
Really?
more than anything else. There's not a whole
for like
lot.
a tourism type thing?
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing about sharks. I mean, well, let's face it. If people like to go watch animals, what do they like to see? They don't. What's the number one thing on YouTube channels when you're sitting there watching African animals? It's seeing lions and leopards and cheetahs run down animals, or crocodiles grabbing stuff out of the water during the Great Migration. So I like to tell people that like to
Yeah.
go to photo safaris. They're like, well, photo safaris, that's what all these people in Africa need to enjoy. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Y'all know what the creme de la creme of a photo safari is, right? And usually they look at me dumbfounded. So let's see the African big five, the lion, the elephant, rhino, all those, Cape Buffalo. But the reality is these people, they really want to see, they want to be back at the safari lodge, sipping on a gin and tonic, waiting for a kudu steak to come off the grill. And somebody in the room has witnessed and videotaped another animal kill another animal. And that's the creme de la creme of a photo safari. So
Mine would be an animal somehow finding somebody there on photo safari and absconding with them.
well, that might be an international incident. So
I mean, it's got to happen from time to time.
well, it happens every day in Africa.
Yeah.
Places where we've worked. I mean, there's people that we did this last film, Killing the Shepherd. You get a chance, watch that. It
Yeah,
tells
for
the
sure.
story of a rural community in Zambia led by a woman chief, which is pretty rare for that part of remote Africa, who wanted to break the bonds of poverty by waging a war against poaching, wildlife poaching. And so these are subsistence farmers. If the crops survive, great, they do fine. If they don't survive, then it's like, well, what do we do? Well, we can kill the animals and we can make some food. That's okay. Or we can, if you get a 12 or 13-year-old daughter who's reached puberty, guess what? I've got 8, 9, 12 kids in my family. I can sell her as a child bride. And for that, I can get 30 bags of corn and feed my family for the next year. The realities over there are so much different than what we're dealing with here in North America or Europe for that matter.
What's interesting too is that people in North America or Europe are very quick to cast a judgment on that decision. I wonder if for whatever reason things were to switch in the first world and we were presented with those choices, if we would do any better.
Well, I mean, let's look at the Middle East. I have these people that say we shouldn't be utilizing wildlife at all for our own benefit. And benefit means food on the table, nourishment. But it also means economic benefit for a lot of things, for a lot of these people. Whether it's a store in Petoskey, Michigan, that on opening day of deer season in Michigan, where 1 million people go out there, and that money that's generated over that time period of all those hunters showing up there, or eastern Montana, opening day of pheasant season, all the money that's generated there, in many cases, allows those little mom and pop places to stay open until the tourists show up next spring.
Yeah.
And so, in the case of Africa, you've got Africans there that, without the income that comes into these very geographically remote areas, well, there's nothing else there. And so you also start asking yourself, well, what am I going to do now? Well, we just brought up the instance of a child bride. Yeah. But here's another one that you'll be familiar with, terrorism. What does terrorism breed on? Poverty. And so if we can create value, if that wildlife can create a value, then we can start hedging some bets against things like terrorism.
Well, it gives them another option.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
If you don't see a light if you can't even recognize you're in a tunnel, let alone see a light, we would see that in both Afghanistan and Iraq. They would try to get people as young as possible, remove them from the situation that they were in, and who knows sometimes obviously it was forcibly, but other times, coming to a family like you said, 12 kids. Not all your kids can survive. Give us a couple. Give us a couple of the young boys. We'll take care of them. And then they pipeline them into a program that could radicalize them and then end up as an act of terrorism somewhere For sure. Yeah, you change the situation of the people who are allowing that to happen or making that choice. Hard to say what the cascading consequences could be, but I'm sure they would be in the positive direction.
Yeah, no, 100%. And humans, I mean, let's face it, we're pretty brutal as a species.
We like to pretend we're not, though.
Yeah, it's
We're
interesting.
sophisticated. We have ascots, and
Yeah, we let other people do the dirty work. I like to say when it comes to our food, we outsource all our killing.
I use the term outsourcing murder for people who have a heavy hand in critiquing hunting but have no problem going to the ribeye section of the local grocery store. The death is the same, and I would argue one is probably at least a little bit more sporting and likely far more ethical than the traditional factory farming.
Boy, you bring up the word sporting, and it gives me just a little bit of an angst there, because the other side, and I'm saying the people that are anti-use, anti-hunting, they like to say that you guys are just doing this because it's a sport. You're getting off on your jollies. This is, trying to show off. And, and the hunting community does a really good job of portraying why it hunts, hence why we have a lot of emphasis on trophies and record books and things like that, which can be misconstrued. But what you're talking about, sporting, and I think that's what a lot of people are out there that do hunt or know hunters, what they need to realize, it's not a sport. We're not sitting around training. Yeah, we might be training for a deer hunt or an elk hunt.
Yeah, I mean
or
a
sheep
sporting
hunt.
chance.
Yes, that is the key thing. And a lot of people don't understand when people use the word sport. That's what we're looking for, is we're looking for that opportunity to know that we're out there committing ourselves to follow that whitetail buck for maybe years. Or we've worked our butt off to the point where we can afford to go on a hunt in Africa or Alaska or something like that. And you want to enjoy that because, I was talking about my dad being being an outdoor writer. And he did a survey back in when I was a kid, maybe 1980 or something like that. And it was about why you hunt. And at the time, we talked about early newspapers, right? It's a physical thing. He had this little survey. It was up against a gutter, which is the middle of the paper. And it was like the top 10 reasons why you hunted. And so you had to go out and cut the thing out. You had to put your name and address on it. Then you had to go ahead and score it 1 through 10. Then you had to fold it up, put it in your own envelope, put the address to my dad on it, lick your stamp. There was no of these self-adhesive things.
Do they make self-adhesive? Oh, they do. That's right. You just peel them right off.
Yeah. So they had to do that. Then they had to walk
Soft generation, Michael.
Then they had to walk down to the mailbox. And so, how many people would respond to this thing? And I'll be danged if my little brother and my mom didn't have to spend every day after school when homework was done for weeks tabulating these things. He got over 40,000 responses off this thing, off of one newspaper on a Sunday. And, looking at the top 10 reasons why people hunted, I think the number 7 reason was actually to kill something.
Yeah.
The number 2 reason was to spend time in the outdoors.
Yep.
The number 1 reason was to spend time in the outdoors with friends and family.
That checks out.
It's still today. I like to say, Andy, there's a reason why a campfire mesmerizes every human being in the world. And it has nothing to do with roasting marshmallows.
I love sitting. It's nature's television set.
Well, that's what we like to say about the fire there in Africa, African TV. So
yeah, people. I have, in the limited time that I have been hunting, I have passed up on far more opportunities to pull the trigger than I have actually taken. It's definitely, it should be clarified, but what I mean is sporting chance, as in the odds are not in your favor. The ethics of it and the morality of it, to me, if it's not a super high likelihood that I'm going to have success, and I'm looking at that from the perspective of, do I have the right angle on the animal? Do I have the right tool for the job? Are they, everything? Do I have a clear line of sight? All of that in the hopes that the ethical and moral decision terminates in the loss of life in as fast,
it's a
short period of time
quick, humane
possible.
kill. That's what every hunter's looking for. The last thing you want to do, especially when you're trying to harvest an animal or kill that animal to put food on your table, you don't want that thing pumped up full of adrenaline because you wounded it and run it all over the side of the mountain.
Which I have done. And it is one of the most gutting feelings ever. Because you're like, oh, I'm such a good archer. That clearly was not where I was aiming. And you feel so deflated. It's the worst feeling ever. And then, the rest of your time is just spent looking and hoping and wondering.
Yeah, well, and that's why hunters, they literally have a responsibility to be literally an expert at whatever form of or method of take that they're utilizing. With an archer, my dad, I remember as a kid, he'd sit there and he gave me my first bow. And, growing up here in Michigan, there's lots of good whitetail deer hunting. You get to go bow hunting when you're 12 years old. So there's this little age requirement. Mm-hmm. So I worked all summer long. And I was a tall, gangly kid, and I had a hard time pulling back a 40-pound bow. And he says, well, until you can pull 40 pounds and you can put 6 arrows in a row in a 6-inch pie plate, you can't go hunting.
That's fair.
And my dad had this whole thing planned for opening day week. We were taking the whole week off from school. We were going to go duck season. It happened to open the same time, and this was the same hunt that I finally was able to get that bow back and get everything, because boy, there was an awful lot riding on this. You got the outdoor writer of the Detroit Free Press wanted to take his oldest son on his first hunt, basically first archery, big game hunt, and so I had to have my stuff together, and it was funny because that first hunt, I'll remember the eve of it. My dad says, "Hey, we're going to go see a real good fly fishing buddy of mine. Remember, this is in Michigan, and there's a lot of good fly fishing there." And so I'm like, "Okay, great." So we went to this lodge out in the middle of nowhere, and there's a couple old guys, and there's one real old guy that was real sinewy, skinny guy, and he was talking about killing stuff all over the world with his longbow, and I was just like, "Oh, great! I'm hoping I can find a whitetail doe tomorrow." And at the end of the conversation, and my dad's like, "Hey, we should get a picture." And I'm like, "Do we?" "If you say so." All right. So we stand up, take a picture, and the old fellow goes, "Well, I should autograph one." And he pulls out this 8x10 glossy of this guy with this big bighorn sheep with his bow, and he signs it whenever. It took me a while to figure out what was going on, but I spent the eve of my first bow hunt with a guy named Fred Bear. Yeah, might have heard of him once or twice. My dad's an old fly fishing buddy. So, like I said, we talked about growing up, how I got in the film business, the interest in the outdoors. You're starting to get a little idea of how important it is to me and the experiences I had, just the blessings that I had as a young kid.
How was your first hunt?
Well, I'll be honest. We were hunting on a place outside of Roscommon, Michigan, a place called Stag Haven. I forgot. It was a football player from the Detroit Lions owned it. Used to play for the Lions, a guy named Bob Kolakowski, and my dad had set this thing up, and we went out there. And I think that first morning, sitting in that stand, it was a ground blind, so you're kind of in a hole, and hoping, back then they put bait out for the deer, so there would be corn or apples or something or carrots out there.
They still do that in a lot of places.
Yeah, they still do. Yeah. So thankfully we don't do that here in Montana. But
I bet you there's some people who are out there.
Well, we could talk about that. I know a few people. So, but it's not legal, but or ethical. And I just eventually had an opportunity. I had a doe walk out at about 15, 20 yards, and I did everything I hoped and prayed to pull that bow back. I think I pointed at the stars before up skywise, and I was able to get a shot on that deer, and it ran out, and it was back. Ended up getting kind of a little far back and got the back of the lungs, clipped them in the liver, and so ran about 50, 80 yards and crumpled up in the ferns. And
it's awesome.
Yeah, it was cool going out there. I still remember the day, the old man walking out there with Bob Kolakowski, his big guy, played football for the Lions, and out there, where'd you shoot it? Oh, here's the blood. All right, find the blood, looking over and over, and I finally found it. And of course, we had to have all the rituals and stuff, so it was a pretty monumental opportunity for the old man and me.
That's awesome.
So. Yeah, you just started hunting. You said here in the last, how long have you been hunting?
I'm trying to think. I started with my bow. It was, if we moved up here in 2017. It was 2017.
2017.
Yeah, so 7 years. Or actually, this hunting season would be 7 years.
And what prompted you to pick up a bow?
I was introduced. I did not like the idea of rifle hunting. I have absolutely nothing against people who hunt with a rifle. Given the world that I came from, I didn't feel like it would have had the difficulty or challenge associated with it. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talk to your average hunter, and a very long shot for most people, and obviously people varies 500 to 700 yards. I mean, I remember going through sniper school, and those were iron sight distances. So,
I think the average shot with a rifle for most American hunters is probably 75 yards.
And which, take that shot all day long. It's going to likely improve your success of an ethical shot and a successful. I wish that I could contact shoot elk. I wish that they would participate with me in this. I don't want to take a long range shot, and it was my own mental stumbling block. And so I just wasn't really that interested in it. And it was around that time period, or shortly before, I was introduced to Joe Rogan. And he was in a phase where he would not shut the fuck up about bow hunting. And I remember the text that I sent him. I said, Joe, seriously, is bow hunting as awesome as you say it is, or is this just two dudes sitting in a blind jerking each other off? That was the actual text I sent him. He goes, no, dude, it's awesome. You need to go get a bow. So I went down to Performance Archery in San Diego, and got a bow. And shortly after that, and I was just shooting in my backyard. This was before we moved to Montana. So I actually had a bow before I moved up here. And there's an event going on right now, which I'm sure you've been to, SHOT. What is it? What is that stand? I always forget. It's whatever.
Shooting, hunting, outdoor.
What's the T? SHOT show, Michael. It's going on right now. Shooting, hunting, outdoor.
Trade show.
Trade show.
It is a wild environment. I'm not even going to try to unpack what you're going to see there, other than to say there's a lot of camo being worn by people who don't need to be wearing it. And Joe happened to be there, and I linked up with him over a dinner, and we got wildly shit-faced, as you do sometimes. So it was me, Joe, and Cam Haynes was sitting there. So he's obviously a bow hunter. And in that night, he introduced me to John Dudley. We were at a dinner for a brand, which I'll leave out of it because the brand is still mad at me for the volume of drinks that I ordered that night and they paid for. But he introduced me to John Dudley. But we were both so drunk that neither of us remembered it. So we had to have two first meetings. But we had exchanged information. And I was trying to remember exactly why I was going out to Madison, where the CrossFit Games was being held. I think I was working with a brand that was in some way peripheral to the CrossFit ecosystem. Not far from Madison, though, is where John lives, just south of Des Moines. So I had reconnected, and he's like, dude, come by, like, we'll do some shooting. And I would stop by at his house, kind of actually showed me how to shoot a bow because I was just making shit up that I had seen on the internet. Mm-hmm. I stayed with him for 2 nights, ended up flying home, and I got a call from him, I think 2 or 3 days after I had left. And he said, I always do my opener up in Alberta, and we just had somebody drop out. And it's like 2 black bear tags, an elk tag, a muley tag. What do you think? I was married to my ex-wife at the time. I'm like, well, I think I'm not allowed to make decisions like this, so give me a few minutes to determine whether or not I'm able to go. And I talked to my wife, and she was like, okay. So I went from like shooting at his house to a few weeks later going up and hunting with him, and goddamn, it was fun. Like no success whatsoever, crawling around in like canola fields trying to sneak up on animals that are instinctually designed to find people sneaking up on them. And I ended up getting 2 black bears, though, so I was successful at that. I don't think I had an opportunity. No. I did have an opportunity on an elk. I missed. Didn't get a muley that year. But it was so much more than I thought it would be. And again, it was...
You were hooked.
I was hooked. And I would have racked and stacked it. What do I remember most about that trip? Hunting with John, but laughing so hard we had to sit down because we were crying. Like an animal could have come out at 2 yards, and I couldn't have pulled my bow back. I was laughing so hard. Mm-hmm. And, hiking a lot of miles and just trying to be a sponge and absorb everything that was going on. And it was so hard to close those distances. Like, yes, this is exactly what I thought rifle hunting wouldn't be. And that kind of kicked it off. And so I hunted exclusively a bow for many years. And I remember hunting with my dad. He definitely used to like to make venison and eggs. And I'm sure he had killed an elk when I was younger. I don't remember the taste of it, but I really fell in love with what wild game tastes like. I've had some gamey meat, but a lot of that is, like you said, not a great shot, and it kind of just lives through the night.
Yeah.
And
yeah, preparation's key here. I'm wrapping up a little film project I've been doing the last few years, working with the Wild Turkey Federation, and I had Daniel Pruitt from Meat Eater out there with me down in Texas. We're doing a project on Rio turkeys, and she was teaching us how to cook the legs because a lot of people don't like the legs
especially for wild ones.
They're leaner. She made this taco that was these wild turkey tacos that with tequila. So you'll like that.
Yeah.
And boy, I'll tell you what, this is out of this world. So much of it's about how you prep it and take care of the animal. And then at the end, it's like how you prepare it. And, if you have some druthers about it, and that's the thing, wild game is a whole lot leaner, doesn't have that fat that our domestic stuff has. And so it does take us a little bit of a talent because we've lost that art for the most part. It's
a denser source of protein. And I've also been fortunate to be invited a lot of places. And for a couple of years, I'll get more meat than I'm able to consume as a family, and then you get to gift it to people and see the impact that has as well. And so now what started off was just this insatiable desire because of the challenge of bow hunting. Then it's like, okay, this game is amazing. I need to keep getting this. And then, life happens and schedules get busy, and you take your bow and you're not successful for the first portion of the trip. You're like, listen, I have freezers that I need to fill. Why don't you give me the boomstick here real fast? So I'm less dogmatic about the how it ends up in the cooler, and very dogmatic that the cooler gets filled.
Yeah, well, it's a bonus both ways, because the time you get out there with that bow, I've grown up around here in Montana hunting my butt off with a bow, especially for elk, and I mean it's
hard.
even big mule deer. It's tough.
Yeah,
and it's a lot tougher now with the amount of people that are out in the field, with the amount of predators that are out in the field, and so it's not a hop, skip, and a walk through the park. Not everybody's pulling the trigger, everybody's flinging an arrow, and that's the one thing you talk about people being successful. When a hunter goes hunting, I mean, very few people actually pull the trigger. I mean, there's hunters back east that go out and hunt the entire whitetail deer season. It might be a couple of weeks of gun season or whatever it is. They might be 70 some years old, and they still haven't killed their first deer.
I think the stats on an elk hunter is it takes the average elk hunter 10 years to get one on the ground. It's a large commitment.
A big money commitment, too.
Especially if you're out of state.
Yeah.
Do you know what the out-of-state tags are going for these days?
Here in Montana, I think the combo is $1,100 or $1,200.
Yeah.
In Montana.
I prefer the resident price.
Yeah, it still adds up.
It does.
I buy tags for all my kids and make sure they get into the draws for all for sheep, elk, and moose.
It was a thin year this year. Michael and I were out with my business partner in the coffee shop, and again, life happens, and then the next thing you end up knowing, you have a very limited amount of time to hunt. Man, we were out for a week. We didn't see a damn thing, and we also didn't see. The first day we were out there, we saw 2 hunters in a side-by-side bringing back some whitetails at sunset. Did you see another animal, Michael, in the back of somebody's truck, an elk? No horns sticking out, empty coolers, people looking at their shoes, super frustrated. I mean,
well, weather plays a big part of it for sure. I mean, this last fall here in Montana, we didn't have a whole lot of cold weather.
I heard that. So we were down by Dillon. I heard that they didn't move into the areas that we were hunting until almost Christmas, which was ungodly late.
Yeah, well, it takes snow to move them out of the mountains,
which we didn't have.
Yeah.
So, and we need some more, because I would really prefer to not have an August in September where I can see 40 feet down the road from smoke.
Well, it won't be out bow hunting, and that's happened before to us, where you get too much of the wildfire season going on, and they have to, unfortunately, restrict bow hunting. And so September, a lot of times we can't head in the woods because of that, and that's happened. In the 26 years I've lived here, it's happened a couple of times.
What brought you up to Montana?
My dad being an outdoor writer, back to him, we used to come out here to Montana when I was knee-high to somebody's britches, and I always wanted to have a place out here, and came out here finally, figured out how to get here, and haven't left. So it's where I'm raising my kids, and it's God's country. It's
always up here in the Flathead?
Yep. Well, I started off over in Lewis and Clark County and worked my way over here.
Okay.
So ended up in a little town outside of Lincoln back in the 90s.
Okay.
And I hung out for a while. Young guy. At the time I had a Labrador Retriever, a little chocolate lab, and got to know everybody in the town and the valley. And a couple years later, it was right after a guy named Ted Kaczynski got picked up by the FBI. And
that guy was just minding his own business, just mailing some packages.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I forgot that was in Montana.
I was sitting in the Wilderness Bar in Lincoln, and a few of these guys I've gotten to know over the years come up to me and go, come clean. Come clean. I go, come clean about what? So how in the world are you here in the middle of nowhere hunting and fishing? They're like, yeah, They all thought I was an FBI agent that had been left to find friends of Ted. And so it was pretty funny back in the day. And but yeah, been up here in the Flathead for a long time now, and I love it.
Montanans are notoriously questioning of outsiders.
Well,
uncomfortable. I don't know what the right word is. They're uncomfortable with them. They're untrustworthy. I don't know the right word, but it's real.
Well, I think the first.
We were talking about it on the way over here.
The first thing I learned when I moved here is called the gate rule. So if you drive up and there's a gate closed and you're allowed to go through it, well, you close the gate after you.
To me, that's like common sense. Yeah. That's just courtesy.
But if you come up to the gate and the gate's open, you leave the gate open.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story is leave it the way you fucking found it.
Correct.
And that's what I tell to a lot of my friends that come here from California over the years.
Yeah, and again, we were talking about this. Do we need to worry about the ones, though, that didn't like the environment in California, so chose to leave?
Well, like I said on the way over here, I think we're looking at a political migration where people were dealing with this whole COVID craziness, the governments and really, I mean, just taking, a shot at your rights, your freedoms. And because of that, I think a lot of people just said, I've had enough of it. And so let's pick a place on the map. So we know Idaho got a lot of people, Montana got a ton of people, Wyoming saw a lot of people, but even places like Texas saw a lot of people moving too. And it's I think it's changed Montana's politics. I mean, I'm not on the Democrat John Tester's mailing list, but for the last year and a half, I've been getting emails from him. And That's odd in my book. And I think that's because, and when I'm talking to kids, parents out there, our kids are out there playing soccer and football and track. And, you're like, well, you're new here. How did you come here? And, came here because of craziness on the West Coast. And I'm like, okay, well, who are you going to vote for? Trump? Oh, wow. All right. Well, that's a little different. Because historically, we've seen a lot of migration from places like California with people that are usually left of center political folks or granola types, that kind of thing. So that's what I've seen over the last 25, 26 years.
I had always associated, or I guess thought of Montana as being a historically red state.
Well, you got to remember, go back to the late 1880s. The mining was king here, and the miners unionized. So they, pretty much Montana's been a center-left state. If you start looking at, especially statewide elections, Democrats have like Mike Mansfield. I mean, he was the longest-serving U.S. senator, I think, at one time in United States history. It was funny. I've been involved in politics a little bit at one time, maybe 20 years ago, and I had these people telling me like, "Well, you're not a Montana native," and I'm like, "Well, who is?" And I said, "Well, Mike Mansfield. You all think he's a great Montana? Oh yeah, he's wonderful." I said, "Y'all know where he was born and raised?" And they look at me like, "Well, Montana." I said, "Nope, New York City." This whole Montana native thing it gets a little out of hand at times because everybody's from somewhere.
The definition shifts a lot depending on who you're talking. No, it's 3 generations. Okay. Another people say, we have to have been here for 20 years. And I don't know how that makes you a native, but all right. I don't know. I mean, I deeply appreciate living here. I mean, we came from a subdivision that had hundreds of thousands of people to a place. I still actually can't get an answer from people of how many people live in Kalispell. They're like, 30,000, 80,000 in the summer. I'm like, motherfuckers, do any of you know how many people live here?
Well, before COVID, the county had 105,000.
The county of Flathead County. And so...
That encompasses all the little towns here, including Kalispell.
Yeah, it's past Lakeside, so that, and then north, does it go all the way up? Up covers Whitefish and then probably west of Whitefish. I know it flips before it gets over to the border. Yeah,
it goes up there towards Eureka. And then it comes over, includes a good,
so 100K.
Good section up to National Park. Yeah.
All right. I could buy that. I could buy 100K. Yeah,
but I think since COVID, so May of 2020, I talked to when I had the driver's license re-up the other 2 years ago. Gal said at that point in time there was 5,000 Californians that were changing their licenses just here in Flathead County every year, and that had been going on for a couple of years. So there's probably another 10 or 15,000 people that have moved into the valley, maybe more.
I wonder if they'll stay though long term.
Well, I mean, the weather hasn't been too awful. It's 42 degrees out here in Montana at the end of January.
A week ago, though, you might want to throw a negative in front of that.
Yeah, but it was minus 38 a week ago, 2 weeks ago. But see, the thing is, Andy, I mean, we historically have usually had 3 or 4 weeks of really bitter
cold snaps every year.
Yeah, and that's how we get rid of all these bad bugs and these beetles that kill our trees. If we don't have that cold weather, it's a problem. And that's a big reason why a lot of our national forests out here are dying. Because we haven't been able to have Mother Nature check some of these beetle species. And so, what we're seeing now, a week, 10 days of 20 below zero, maybe 30 below zero, 40 below zero for a couple of days, to the average Montanan, that's kind of a hop, skip, and a park.
I'm not a native, everybody, but I was out. I mean, I have a nice jacket, some good pants, boots, perhaps. And the key is the remote start of the vehicle, assuming the battery has enough juice to do it.
The key is having a heated garage. That's the key, my friend. Oh.
Yeah. I worry about the Montana's economic ability to support all those people that moved in. Looking at the price of real estate in the valley, and I mean, the median income is, you can kind of look it up, and those two numbers are pretty different.
Well, I think right now we were somewhere around close to $1 million is the entry-level price in Whitefish for a house. I think the last time I saw it, about $950,000, something like that. But even at $650,000, which is what we're dealing with down here in the rest of the valley, it's a great question. But I'll tell you, I watched back in the late '90s, early 2000s, 2 U.S. senators we had here, Max Baucus and Conrad Burns, basically get as much federal dollars as they could and turn around and literally piped all that into our telephone co-ops all over the state to build and put fiber optics in. So I've been out antelope.
Long ago?
Oh yeah, I've been out hunting antelopes out in the middle of nowhere, antelope, and here's one of these orange cones that says "Don't dig fiber optics." And so I've got rancher friends and outfitter buddies all over Montana that have high-speed internet, and it's all land-based fiber. I mean, I got fiber to my house here.
Do you
I've got
really?
my own node and a 2.4 gigahertz line that comes into my place. Which,
That's
being
insane.
a filmmaker, I've got better internet than most people that are hooked up to Google.
I mean, that's great foresight to have that infrastructure. And I guess there's the ability to work remotely, but the average income for somebody living in Kalispell, $40,000 to $60,000, and I think that actually might be a multifamily income.
Yeah,
Starting
husband
price,
and wife.
yeah, $600,000 house. I mean, those two numbers just don't add up.
Well, and historically, people move here. They don't want a full-time job. They want to have a bunch of part-time jobs so they can go recreate.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of the historical thing. Especially the last 25 years that I've seen. You get these people that want to be a ski bum, and then they want to go hiking in the park all summer long, and then they want to do rafting or fishing or whatever it is, or hunting, whatever their deal is. They want to have multiple jobs that give them the ability to have as much flexibility as possible when it comes to doing what they love to do.
Do you think the politics is trending in the right direction or the wrong for Montana, in your opinion?
Well, it depends on where you stand on the level, right? So if you're left of center, then I would say that's probably not trending your way. If you're right of center, then it's probably going in your way. I mean, we've got a super majority in the state legislature right now by Republicans. You've got a Republican governor for the first time, and well, I mean, we had 16 years, the first 16 years of this time period here. We had Democrats in with Schweitzer and Bullock. Yeah, I mean, I think, historically we've been pretty independent-minded when it comes to voting, but I'm starting to see a lot more people that are, really going party line votes, and that's what they're really pushing. And again, it comes with this polarization that we're seeing all over the country, all over the world, and it's unfortunate because here in Montana, most of us are pretty independent-minded and like to talk to the other guy. I mean, there was a senator down in Missoula County I got to know named Dale Mallam, and this guy, he was a Republican in Missoula, which is, usually don't go very atypical. And but he owned the local hardware store, and everybody'd known him, and he'd been there forever. He was trustworthy, and he was a good guy, and he listened to everybody. And so I think this political paranoia that goes on and that gets, especially at the national level, they keep feeding it in here. It's not good for anything. And when you add social media to it, I think it's just echo chambers, right? And all the algorithms basically are designed to put you in front of what they think you want you to listen to or what you want to hear. So it just tends to up the volume.
Yeah. Do you think the polarization is intentional?
Well, I think in the name of business and the almighty share price, I mean, it's all about clicks, right? It's all about viewership. That's how you make more money when it comes to the media, and so that's why we have these crazy headlines now. They don't really say that's one of the most. You get on this app and you want to read something, it says something like, "Well, what do you mean?" It means that whoever is doing this to somebody, and it's like, well, I don't. But you would click it on because it's like, well, there's no way that could happen. And it absolutely hasn't happened, but this hypothetical, maybe matchup in politics or maybe hypothetical trade in football, is
The old bait and switch, if you will.
Well, absolutely, which I think is illegal when it comes to business, especially in truth in advertising laws.
Yeah.
So, and it's, but yeah, bait and switch is a pretty good term for it, I would say.
Yeah, I've fallen for that quite a few times. Just a sensational headline, and you click on it, you're like, God damn it, you got me.
Yeah.
And then I think I probably did read the article.
Yeah, well, that click happened. If you're on there for more than 3 seconds, then it counts. So
It's interesting how people forget that their attention is actually what is of value to the companies. And the more clicks that they can get, the more value the company can potentially perceive, and the more that marketing dollars are going to get spent. Like, that's the economy. It's your attention. That's what they're going for.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of that is smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
I did outdoor television for about 7-8 years. NBC Sports came to me and said, hey, we'd like you to do a TV show. And so we ended up doing a show called Eye of the Hunter. Ended up on Monday nights against Monday Night Football. Ran all the way through 2015. And, you want to look at Nielsen ratings because that's how you base your advertising and what's going on. And
I've never met somebody who has a Nielsen box. How does that shit work?
Well,
I've never met somebody who knows somebody who has a Nielsen rating box.
Well, it's because only a very small group of people have Nielsen boxes, and it's all based on statistics.
And does that box just watch not watch, I guess it would be recording what they watch, and it reports that data back, and that's how you get ratings? Like, how does that system work?
You're not talking to an expert on it, other than I was pretty well versed in ratings and who had ratings and who didn't have ratings.
I mean, data is great, but I'm actually oftentimes more interested in where the data came from.
Yeah, well, it's even looking at social media. You'll see Facebook posting. We do a lot of advertising, promoting our stuff on through our nonprofit, and they'll be like, "Well, this is your reach." Well, I don't care what the reach is. Well, I care about is people that comment, like, and share.
Engagement.
Engagement, you know. That's the only thing I'm going to pay for, but you're paying for reach.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, and I've seen people in various medias that really push this reach thing. And, you know, it's like, how many clicks did you have, or how many of this and how many of that? And for the most part, it's all bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's even feature films. When you start looking at, you know, $100 million budget major feature film, they're going to spend $100 million marketing it. And it's all a scheme about, you know, how do we drive traffic to these things? And yeah, people buy tickets, you get some stuff, people watch things. But how long has it taken Netflix and all these online streamers to give us data about who's watching what, how many minutes? I mean, literally, that just happened. I mean, they were forced to finally do it, you know, but that's, you know, how can you be spending all this money with these outfits, not really knowing what you're getting out of it?
Podcasting is kind of the same way. For the person creating the podcast, you get very limited information about, you know, you hit upload and it's in the Ethernet somewhere. You can see, you know, country and state breakdowns sometimes. They'll give you a broad age range demographic. Sometimes it'll be like male, female. But upstream of that, I have to assume is the data that they're selling to advertisers. What device are they on? What time of day are they looking at it? Like a very robust data set. To the person actually creating it, they're like, here's your total downloads.
Yeah. No, they're definitely monetizing you. So,
well, they're monetizing everything they can. I mean, I'm not anti-capitalism. I totally get it. It's just interesting to see, like when Netflix, why would you want to withhold that data? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because it has value, and that's what you're using to upsell to other people. Of course, they don't want to share that stuff. So I get it.
But in the case of Netflix, they're not selling advertising, not yet. Well, so what are they selling? Well, they're selling to, you know, those folks that are paying the money every month to have access to their content. And you're talking about a production juggernaut where they're creating, what is it, in the billions of dollars worth of content, you know, multiple billions of dollars. And
I mean, I remember when Netflix was mail order. Again,
dude,
I was a subscriber to Netflix when you got DVDs in the mail. The amount of fees that I have saved since they have gone digital. Fuck, I would lose. God, I would lose Netflix DVDs all the time.
So I used to produce these extreme sport films. One was called Sledheads. It was all about these extreme snow, working with X Game athletes and all these people all over North America doing stupid sled tricks and crazy things. And I also did an ATV film called Mountains and Muds. It was all 4x4 stuff. And I remember getting a phone call one day from somebody who said, "Hey, do you know Netflix has your DVDs?" And I'm like, well, I didn't sell it to them. Well, one of my distributors had sold them to them. But, you know, you sell, you know, for $10, they get my DVD at Netflix back then, and they go out and rent it out to 10, 100, 500 people. I only got $10. So it wasn't a good racket by any means.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't watch the entertainment industry too closely, but you can see some of these high A-level actors and actresses talking about or backing out of deals because of the streaming platform and the impact it's making on what they get paid.
Yeah.
It's an interesting conversation. I mean, to me, it's tough to it's not tough. I guess it's hard to really connect when you're listening to a multimillionaire complain about making less millions. And I don't want to take anything away from their art form. And some of them are fantastic. It's just a little bit tough for me to connect on. I can understand what they're saying for the value of the time and what they're doing and what they're being rewarded. It's certainly interesting and evolving. Yeah,
well, you know, I've got some experience with Amazon. A lot of my projects have ended up on Amazon Prime. And it wasn't too long ago that anybody that has good, well-produced content could get on Amazon, can place it themselves on Amazon Prime.
Really?
And make it access, you know, to everybody. But that's changed the last couple of years. Where now it's, and of course they would only pay you the number of minutes that are streamed on your content. And we're talking about pennies here, pennies. But if you had a really good film out there, you could actually make a sizable chunk of change. I know some guys that were making millions of dollars off their films. The reality, though, today is Netflix, Amazon, some of these other outfits. They're producing so much of their own content and spending so much, you know, such an investment that they don't want anything else there. They want to drive all of the traffic to their productions.
Well, yeah,
and which makes sense. I mean, it's their business model. But you got to remember, those models all got made by people like us that came on there and watched this stuff. And in a lot of cases, like Facebook, right? You know, we had access to Facebook. We could actually see things. We could talk to people. And now you're all pigeonholed into very specific places based on what they need to do to make money. So, and if they don't like what you have to say, you're gone.
What do you think would happen to society if they pulled the plug on social media?
I think we'd be a much better place.
Do you think it'd be bedlam for like a week though?
Wow, yeah, who cares? We're
People
in Montana.
just
There'd be a lot of
losing their
us would
shit.
be sitting around campfires and singing, singing
Let's not
songs
pretend
and,
that there's not some people up here who are completely, utterly addicted to social media. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I think everywhere in the world there's people addicted. I mean, I've been on safaris in Africa where you got game scouts and trackers, whatnot, in the back of the safari truck and the cruiser with you. You're bumping along the trail, and they're like, "Well, are you on Facebook?" Well, yeah. Are you on Instagram? Yeah. And and there's cell service out in the middle of nowhere. And these guys are sitting there going through the phone. Next thing I know, boom, oh, you got a new friend, new follower. And it's, Muhammad or whoever it is you're with. And I'm like, oh, the world's gotten a lot smaller. So,
God, there's a part of me that really wishes all of that stuff would just shut off.
well, I think my wife is an accomplished huntress and wildlife conservationist, and when Cecil the lion was shot, I mean, we had a TV show about hunting and conservation and the adventure of the hunt, and we were slated to be in the Today Show, with on NBC, and of course we worked for NBC Sports, and when they heard that we were going with a Big Brother, it became a big problem for us. But we got a whole lot of folks calling up saying, well, why are we hunting? Why are we doing all this stuff? But what we saw more than anything else was this internet traffic of just nothing but hate and vitriol. I mean, at the time my wife was pregnant, I wouldn't even allow her to get on social media. I probably banned and deleted many thousands of people. And it was just nothing but people that wanted to kill us, wanted to kill our children, wanted to skin our kids and put them up on their walls, wanted to cut my wife's head off and shit down her throat, pour acid in our kid's face or my wife's face, all because of this perception that was being propagated through social media. Is that somehow we were evil people, that hunters are evil. And it's a sad state to see where our society is when, let's go back in history. I mean, the guy that had the elk horns or the bison head on the front of his teepee, well, we knew he provided, right, for the community. And not everybody went out hunting in a community. Only a few of them were actually good enough to do the hunting. And when the other guys were good at making arrowheads or making clothing or shoes or whatever it was. And so hunters have always had a really, really important part of human society. But this modern age, what we talked about earlier, this outsourcing of our killing, we've lost touch with nature. And that's really the biggest problem. And part of why I'm doing what I'm doing now and why we formed this little nonprofit called the Shepherds of Wildlife Society was to try to bring modern society back to nature, to reconnect them so that they understand where their food comes from. They understand that the decisions they make every day have downstream effects, not only for them and for wildlife, but also for the people that live in these rural landscapes. Because let's face it, with 8 billion humans on the planet, somebody better be taking care of these wild places, being a shepherd or a steward to them. And we do have those people. And if they see a benefit for taking care of the wildlife and the land they live in, guess what? We're going to have these healthy ecosystems. We're going to have vibrant wildlife populations. We're going to have, clean drinking water. And those are all things that most people in the city, when they wake up in the morning, they flip a switch, they expect the lights to come on. They don't know where electricity comes from. They don't care as long as the light's on. And the next thing is to walk in the bathroom, flush the toilet, out of sight, out of mind. The next decision of the day, is it a chai latte or a caramel macchiato? Well,
I mean, no, those are the only two because those are trash.
Well, but
that's like the shit Michael drinks.
Yeah, but that's my point, is that's the depth of things. But we talked about campfires. We talked about that connection with the land and the earth. I mean, we need to be better stewards of the land. We need to be better neighbors with everything that lives on this planet. And I think that's what we're really trying to do is allow these rural communities to have a voice on the world stage. That's why I'm making these films. And we did this film, Killing the Shepherd, which it's now on all the different platforms, Amazon, Tubi, Apple TV, all that. But it's telling the story of this community and how wildlife provided for them. It's not just the wildlife, though. We had a family, second and third generation white Zambians that came in, and they invested some serious money, and they were tied to the hunting community, yes, but they also created a multifaceted economic model, which included a fish farm, above ground fish farms, which, hey, we can create a protein source. They don't have to go kill the animals. Oh, if we have a business, then we have jobs. Okay, all right. Then you not only, we all know kind of how the, one person gets hired, that affects, there's a whole coattail effect there. So, you get 100 people hired in a village in the middle of nowhere, Africa. You're talking about 1,000, maybe 1,500 people. And part of me being there, there was some schools that they had. These are open air, thatched roof, dirt floor schools, kids just in their regular clothing and not uniforms or any school supplies. And I just happened to have my father-in-law home one day when I came back from doing one of these shoots. And I knew he had a little charity. He's a cardiologist from California, and so he's been trying to give back. And he's got a little charity called the African Children's Schools. And so to date, I think they've built over 60 schools in remote parts of Africa. He was on a hunting trip in Ethiopia and had an epiphany and said, you know what, I need to help these people out. I'm not going to go spend a bunch of money on hunting. I'm going to go help build schools. And so I happened to be showing him some video at the living room or kitchen table, and he's like, well, I help people build schools. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of heard about it, whatever. And he's like, the next day we were on a WhatsApp call with the operator in Africa, the safari operator. And within a week, we had 50% of the money sent to him to build 3 schools and teachers' residences and uniforms and latrines and all the things these kids needed. And the reason why I bring it up is because of this model, because of what these people are doing. There was about 80 kids, I think, that they had 80 to 100 kids that they had to get uniforms. That was the order the first year, and that was in 2018. Last fall, the order was for 600.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and those kids, not only are they going to school, but they're learning English, which, let's face it, folks, that is the language of commerce, the international commerce. These are the leaders, not only of their community, maybe even the leaders of their own countries down the road. And the reason why they were able to get that first couple legs up the ladder of prosperity is because of hunters, because of people that were going to go hunting and valued the wildlife. And so it's really important people understand that hunters are not evil people. It's really easy to vilify hunters because they're harbingers of death, right? And we don't want to. I'm a firm believer.
As a species, we are, though.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but human beings can't exist exclusive of ending other species' lives. It's just, Well,
I have a little thing I use in my presentations. Everybody, we're at a film screening, so we got all these people in the theater. Raise your hand. Somebody always asks, do we have to kill the animals? Okay, well, first of all, everything that we see today is going to die. All right, that's just a fact. And everything in nature is programmed to overpopulate the carrying capacity of the land, which means there's going to be more lions, more elephants, more deer, more elk, more grizzly bears than we can shake a stick at, because that's how we survive. That's how species survive. But I ask people, raise your hand if you bought a McDonald's Happy Meal. And of course, everybody raises their hand. And I'm like, well, let me explain something here. There's nothing happy about a Happy Meal. Do you understand me? There's nothing happy about a Happy Meal. I don't care if you bought the cheeseburger or the chicken nuggets. You paid someone to raise and slaughter an animal to feed your kid. And that's okay. All right. That's okay. Because without the death of 60 billion land-based animals and 1.4 trillion water-based animals annually, and that's UN data, United Nations, humanity ceases to exist. Let's face it. If we don't have a belly that's full every night, what do we get? Chaos. And look all around the world where people are underfed or malnourished. Look at what's going on now in Sudan, what's going on everywhere else. You've seen this firsthand when you've been deployed.
And I forget where the quote comes from. I think it's 9 meals from anarchy.
Yeah, 100%. So if we take care of these resources, which is what hunters do, that ethically hunt, that use science-based conservation principles behind their hunting, wildlife. The IUCN, which is this kind of quasi-government organization that monitors wildlife populations over the world, came out in 2016 with a report that said that basically because of hunting, wildlife in North America and Southern Africa are holding their own or expanding their range. Everywhere else in the world, it's in the toilet. And now we're starting to see places around the world where I'm looking to tell the stories of some of these communities, places in the stands that have basically conservation conservancies that are community oriented, where these people are like, hey, that Markhor sheep there, if you take care of that, not kill it and feed your family, but let some hunter come from North America or Europe, he'll pay $110,000 US to shoot that thing. That's just the government fee, and another $40,000 for the outfitter. Well, they've set it up so that these people do see a benefit. They actually get some of this money.
Yeah.
And that's also an issue too, especially we talk about Africa, talk about corruption. Well, we know corruption's all over the world, right? And all these governments.
We could have a full conversation about corruption here in the United States.
Yeah, we
don't
absolutely
even need to leave our own borders for
Yeah,
that.
no, we could do that. And I like to say about our African friends that they learned it from their colonial masters. And you have a scenario there where, could we do a better job? Yeah, I mean this last film I did, Killing the Shepherd, I wrote a book about it called Killing the Shepherd Beyond the Film. So all the things that ended up in the on the cutting room floor, because when you make a film, there's an awful lot that happens you just can't tell. But when you write the book, you can tell everybody what you thought. And in some cases, I had to be careful because you haven't seen the film when you watch it. We had some pretty traumatic scenarios there where people lost their lives and whatnot. And so you have to be careful with that. But it does give you an opportunity and a platform to tell people about, based on your experiences, here's a way forward. Here's a blueprint. And there's a vision here. And that's what I do in the book. And I've literally given that book to quite a few government ministers over in Africa where they have viable wildlife populations. And if you want to keep them, make sure the people on the ground see a value. And if they see a value, they're going to take care of it. And there's thousands of years of human history with plenty of examples where we've pretty well mucked it up. And so that's really what we're trying to do through the Shepherds of Wildlife Society, is bring these people together, let them understand kind of what the realities are of their decisions. And let's not make hunters out to be villains. Hunters aren't, does hunting need to have some, maybe a few do-overs, or maybe have an ethics reset? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that goes on that, in the way hunting is portrayed by, and I liken it to real estate, 95% of the real estate is sold by 5% of the realtors, right? Because they're good at it. Yep. And so 5% of the hunters put out 95% of the bullshit that you see on social media, outdoor television, which I like to say most of it shouldn't be on television. It's just continually goes out there so when you're holding that animal, now whether it be that elk that you busted your butt on, all season long and finally got a chance, or maybe you were able to go someplace and shoot whatever animal. When you're holding that picture and you post it on Facebook, to a lot of people, you don't look any different than an ISIS terrorist that just cut off the head of some human being with your knife on YouTube today in Syria.
This is a very different optic, for sure. Man, those are two very extreme examples.
Yeah, they are, but that's
because those people haven't actually met an ISIS terrorist and looked them in the white of their eyes.
Yeah,
they might have a little bit of a different feeling about that. I think I can understand what you're saying. Something you said earlier has had me thinking since you said it, and it has to do with the overwhelming amount of negative commentary and threats and the things that you got. I do spend time just wondering about all of the information that we have access to. I'm kind of landing on, I don't know if our species is evolving as fast as our technology and our ability to, are we designed to be this connected? And I do think that people can go into the social media ether, whether it's Facebook or whatever platform, with a little bit of confirmation bias. Like if you're only looking for negative things, you're going to find it. If you're looking for positive things, you are going to find it. But Cecil the Lion is a good example of like this tsunami of negativity. And I wonder if as humans, there are just a lot of people where their baseline emotion throughout the day is anger, and now they have this crazy easy tool to express that. Or is the tool itself so easy that it removes the normal filter that, you know what I mean, that people would have? Like, or as we...
Well, I think it's a combination of both, Andy. I mean, I think of it as it's easy. The threshold to express your opinion on a keyboard completely anonymously for the most part.
Yeah, it's almost non-existent.
Yeah, it's simple. So if, it's like being out there in the snowball fight there and, hey, I know I can go ahead and throw one at this one kid who's always been the bully and maybe he won't catch me. But when we start talking about getting into our communities and we're going to go and, is this guy going to say this thing to me and my wife when he walks into the grocery store or a church?
Unlikely.
No, probably not. And
But is he angry underneath? Even though he wouldn't, because he understands that there's more of a consequence than being anonymous on the internet. I just wonder, at a baseline, are we just surrounded by people that are angry all the time?
Well, I think it even gets so much. I'm a firm believer that I don't think humans were ever programmed in our DNA to live in these monstrous suburban, urban settings, with millions and millions of people sitting in traffic for hours and hours every day, dealing with the stress that comes with being close together. I mean, you put two, let's face it, let's go out duck hunting, and some guy sets up his ducks next to your ducks, your decoys out there. wow, that's going to create some stress, right? Or you put a campsite and somebody sets a campsite up next to yours. I mean, I'm not talking about two
Depends
campsites.
on who it is.
Well, yeah, but I mean, let's just say you're out in an area where it's not, you know,
You're out in the Missouri River breaks.
Yeah, I'm going to pull off on the shore and I'm going to set up my tent over here, and here comes two other guys and they set up their tent on the same shore right next to me. It's going to create a little bit of angst, right? Because as a species, we like space. At least I do. And I don't think it's in our DNA to have so many people on top of each other. I mean, look what's going on right now in Israel and with the Palestine, you know, Hamas and everything else going there. I mean, think about how all the people are stacked on top of each other in there.
And I mean, social media is just a digital version of that.
Mm-hmm.
It is the online bullying thing is real. When I had first heard about that, it was years ago. I was thinking, what do you mean? How could that be? And then I saw it specifically with my daughter. And I'm not saying this is true of everybody, but I think a lot of parents with children that are teens could agree, especially if their whole teen social circle exists on that device. When they hear their device go off, they respond. It's not, I'm going to manage this. And I'm not saying that everybody can't do that, because of course you can set up, you know, times when you are alerted to things or whatnot. But I watch my daughter and it's like bing response, bing pick up the phone. It's like the shocking a rat and giving it a piece of cheese, to make a fucking very rough analogy. But I saw the impact of people she didn't know having the ability to contact her at any time they wanted to, disrupting sleep patterns, disrupting train of thought, and, you know, she's trying to study or do schoolwork, whatever it may be. Bing, somebody across the world, and if they're being a shithead, you can't really escape it. It's the digital version of being compacted, and where you have to like manage that interaction in space. And like, I agree, I do better when I was going to say I do better when I'm not around people. I do better when I'm around my people. And then I get a little edgy when there are other people that come out that I just don't know. I'm not very trusting of human beings. I've seen a little shit behavior from human beings. But yeah, you have the physical vice, then the digital vice. I mean, I don't know how fast human brains evolve, but I don't think it's that fast.
No. There's a reason why I took electronics out of every one of my kids' rooms at night. I mean, that was our rule. 8
How'd that
o'clock
work?
on. Well, it worked great until I got to be about 17. So... And I was like, yeah, we also offered to give them large sums of money if they didn't have a social media account. And that didn't work at all with the three oldest. So
Really?
they didn't even care. So,
whoa, that is interesting. They turned down a large sum of money because, and I'm going to assume that was probably a social currency thing. That's what their friends had. They wanted to be involved in the
Snapchat, things like that. Yep. That's how they all communicate.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all heard the stories about the kids sitting across from the diner or the restaurant from each other, and they don't talk to each other. They text back and forth.
I wish I could say I haven't been guilty of that. I try to be very intentional. Like if we're going to go out, my father just had his 77th birthday. God, he looked like he was just the happiest I've ever seen. All three of his grandkids, well, he has 5 grandkids, but 3 of them were there, the ones that live up here. My wife was with me, his wife was with him, and it was great because nobody brought their phone out on the table. But I had it in my pocket, right? And you feel it, it goes off, and your first instinct is to go reach for it. Yeah. And I did, but I just silenced it, and I put it back in without actually looking at it. If you don't do that, holy shit, it goes right back to the Brad Pitt quote from Fight Club. The things that you own end up owning you.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we've made it a rule: no phones at the table. Yeah, no ifs, ands, or buts. But you get together with somebody now. You got these new iPhone watches.
The watches. I intentionally. So I had a pretty severe tummy ache about a month and a half ago, which terminated in surgery. Really recalibrated. I was like, you know what? I haven't been doing as good of a job as I need to be doing to focus on health. So I got this mostly to kind of monitor sleep, heart rate variability, all of those things. And it has the option in the initial setup. Do you want to sync this phone for notifications? I could not hit no fast enough because
that's good to know.
But I love sitting down and having conversations with people like you, and how fucking distracting would it be if it's like burp and it's going off and you just kind of like.
Well, what's distracting is the person who actually sits there and lifts it and looks at it while they're talking to you, and it's like, okay,
they do this.
Do you have something you need to be doing?
They have this.
I can
Oh yeah,
go.
Tom, that's totally good. Yeah, I completely. And you're just like, hold on, I have something in my pocket for you.
Yeah, I'll see you later. Oh,
Yeah, I go that same night that we were out there, and I say this without any judgment of the people who were doing the behavior I'm going to talk about, because I've been so victim of this myself. You look around and there's couples, old and young. There's large tables, and most of the people are there with others, but interacting on their phone. And I am not going to say that hasn't been me, because it absolutely has. It's hard to not be that person.
well, for me as a filmmaker and doing the things I do, what has an iPhone created for me, or a smartphone? It's my office. But you have to be careful not to become a slave to it, working
24-hour availability.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you turn it off at a certain time and you use it when you need to. But it's like, well, you're on it. Well, I might be on it 4 hours a day, 6 hours a day. Just depends on. I'm literally sending emails to people. I'm putting quotes together. I'm booking things. I may be searching music libraries. I may be reviewing film that's been set up onto a reviewer, website.
Yeah.
A lot of our, we've got a guy here in town that I'll have to introduce you to, a guy named Matt Hartle. He owns Bake Studios, and Matt is a really cool dude. He grew up here in Kalispell, went to Pasadena to the art school, and wanted to work in motion effects work, and ended up working on a couple series of films. One's called Harry Potter, and the other was Star Wars, I think. And
Haven't really heard of them. Hopefully they did well.
Yeah, and went on, and now, because we talked about the internet connectivity and what we have here, so he's in the East Side Brick over here, and he's got a studio in there, and he's doing some of the top VFX work in Hollywood.
That's awesome.
And he's living right here in Kalispell, and so he actually did.
That's the pro.
Yeah. So
the con is the individual who can't communicate without 6 inches of glass in front of their face.
Yeah.
They will communicate with you, but that has to be through that medium.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about this, instead of having me go to Hollywood to work with somebody, I can just get my car down from Whitefish, and I can drive down here to Kalispell.
That's awesome.
Sit in there and work for a little bit with them, and go out to lunch and interact with them. And then even our sound guy came from Disney Studios sound department, moved out here a couple of years ago, and is living over in Big Fork.
Sounds to me like you're the one bringing in all these Californians. That's what I'm getting out of these stories.
Yeah. They've already here. I just happen to find out they're here. And there's quite a few quite a few people in the motion picture film business that have been in Kalispell I can remember working on one of those Iron Eagle movies, and there were several guys in the camera department that had houses on Flathead Lake. This is back in the early 90s. Yeah.
I heard Sharon Stone has a house up here.
I've heard all kinds of people have houses around here, but you don't really see them. So
my middle son swears to this day he saw Johnny Depp driving. He said it was an orange Lamborghini through downtown Kalispell. And I find it hard to believe.
Yeah. There's a lot of crazy things around here, that's for sure. So
I'm here for it.
Yeah. No, it's a good thing. So, but yeah. So, anyways,
how did you find this particular location? What was it about this particular topic that hooked you in?
Well, as I mentioned, what we really are trying to do is give a voice to these rural communities. And so because I'm out doing the work I do, I run into a lot of different people from all over the world, tied to hunting and other things like that. And so, my wife is a hunting consultant, so we're always at the safari. Oh, yeah. So like a travel agent for hunting. So if you would like to go and go on African safari, or you want to go hunt elk, or if you'd like to go hunt sheep in some of the stands or markhor, or whatever it is.
Never go to a country that ends in Stan.
Yeah, well, I had a great trip in Kyrgyzstan, so.
Never go to countries that end in Stan. You might have had one good trip. Don't go back a bunch of times.
We'll work on that one. But so anyways, I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of different people, and I'm always looking for these stories that, let's be honest, it's these people don't really have a story unless there's some conflict going on. And I'd heard about the Highlands of Scotland. I don't know how many people here listen to this podcast have Scottish ancestry, but a lot of people in this country do. And there's a reason for it, which I was able to figure out in working on this project. It's called The Last Keeper. And it's a story of rural folks, people that work in the sporting estates. So this is your gillies, your deer stalkers, your keepers, your game keepers. These are people.
What's a ghillie?
Ghillie usually is like an assistant guide.
Okay.
Or could be a fishing guide. They kind of a little bit of that term can be used different ways. But these are people that work for the sporting estates. And so the sporting estates evolved, in the late 1700s and the early 1800s, especially when Queen Victoria, when she went up to Scotland, she couldn't go to Europe for some vacation, so she ended up in the Highlands and fell in love with it. And that's how she ended up buying Balmoral. And so that started the Victorian age of the sporting estates in Scotland and, throughout the UK. And there's a lot of history that you have to unpack to really understand this story. So I saw that there was a real issue with land use and the fact that the people that were using the land to do conservation, and let's understand something here. Conservation, the very essence of it is to conserve. You physically have to do something. So to be a conservationist, it means you have to conserve. And what they'll say in the dictionary is it's the wise use of a natural resource.
Okay.
The two antidotes they'll use is water conservation. So if we're running out of water, they tell you, the government says conserve your water, right? Don't put it out in your, don't flush it down the drain. They use the antidote of wildlife conservation. It's a renewable resource. That's one thing everybody needs to realize. Everything breeds, even elephants, and everything's programmed to overpopulate the carrying capacity of the land. Hence, here in Montana, we've got grizzly bears that we're seeing hundreds of miles from the Rocky Mountain front, which was, the Bob Marshall Wilderness, where they all got pushed into after Lewis and Clark came here by settlement, and development here over the last 150 years. So now we're seeing them places we haven't seen them in 100 years.
When did they get delisted? Do you know?
No, they've never been delisted. Well, they got listed.
They got listed. I'm sorry.
I think it was 74. Don't
Okay.
quote me on it, but it's been a while. And
I'm starting to hear people talking about maybe it might be a good idea to delist a certain amount.
Well, you're looking at a scenario where you have a species of animal that is pretty much the top of the food chain, including with humans. And we have many humans that are, whether they be hunters, hikers, berry pickers, mountain bikers, fly fishermen, that are being maimed and or killed every year in Montana and northwestern Wyoming and Idaho. We have to decide as a society what we're willing to live with. Do you want to be worried about taking your kids or your dog or whatever else? I've got grizzly bears that come through my property. We've got trail cams up, and I happen to live off the Whitefish River, and it's a travel corridor for wildlife, which is great. I want to see that. I think it's great to have the biodiversity there. It's important, but we also have to realize there's going to be certain places that we have to decide what we're willing to live with and what we won't. So I'm
not interested in a beast that wants to eat me asshole first while I'm still alive.
Yeah.
The guy who makes my t-shirts for the podcast, he owns a company called 12 Ounce Profit. He's fantastically creative. He's got a house near an area where every once in a while, Old Fish and Game is bringing out one of those big pill-shaped metal containers.
Culvert trap. Yeah.
So they catch them, and they move them to into Glacier. That fucker is back within 24 hours because they have him collared. Yeah. Holy shit.
Yeah. It's a little, it doesn't quite work sometimes.
Yeah, but, they're I really don't appreciate this. Thank you for allowing me to walk for 25 plus miles, but I'm on it, and I'm just going to go back and eat the person's dog that I wanted to eat.
It's like translocating elephants in Africa less than 600 miles. I mean, they can easily migrate 600 miles in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
So, but what I saw was a land use conflict, and so the wildlife over there, all native wildlife that they utilized, these sporting estates, they're all subsidized by the landowners. None of them make a bunch of money, but you've got this urban band or belt of people that live in Glasgow and Edinburgh that have the ear of the politicians. They have the votes. Mm-hmm. And there's this, I would almost call it a rewilding, urban rewilding movement. And this idea of rewilding is pretty foreign to what we probably deal with here in the United States. But the idea behind it is we just let nature be free. No human interaction. Nature does what it does. And so when it's interesting because...
It's an interesting concept because you're saying in a super small area we should do that, but in every area outside of that, humanity is kind of living unchecked.
Yeah.
I don't know if those two would necessarily
cohabitate well. Let's give a little history here. Scotland, for people who don't realize this, it's only the landmass size of New Jersey.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
2 weeks there. It was fantastic.
Beautiful place. It has about 4 to 5 million people total. Most of them, 90% of them, live in this band of population. Not very many people live in the Highlands. It's just these people that mostly work these estates or cater to these estates. And there's its own economic world there. But because of rewilding, there's this move, and this goes back to, literally the film we do, we go back, we used, I was talking about Matt Hartle, he did some animation for us. We go back to Pictish times and kind of what happened with the Romans when they came in, and then we get into the Norman conquest. William the Conqueror in 1066, he comes in, and he actually brought in feudalism. So with them, they looked at the land, and the land was owned by the king, and he would part and parcel the land out to his buddies, those knights, and these guys would get these estates, of which they would able to, use the estates to generate revenue so that they could do whatever they wanted to do, but at the same time also pay their tithes back to the
kickback.
Yeah, back to the old king. But the other thing that came out of this that's really cool, Andy, is like, okay, so what do you know as the definition of a forest? To you, what does a forest mean?
Oh, wow. I'm going to give you a sloppy, broad definition. I guess it would be a parcel of area that is densely wooded.
Oh, you're way off.
Oh, yeah.
Way off.
I don't know if you know this. I'm an idiot.
Yeah,
so
no.
I've never been also asked what is my definition of a forest. But
forest absolutely means nothing, has nothing to do with trees.
Really?
Yeah, it means the royal hunting grounds. That's what the word forest is. It's a word that came out from the Normans. And so, in Scotland, so we're gonna move forward a little bit here to 1746. You have the Jacobite Revolution. That's the last time in Britain that they've had a revolution. The Jacobites, led by Bonnie Prince Charlie. You got two different warring families over the crown of England. They lose in the Jacobite Revolution. You have the Battle of Culloden. I don't know how many people have watched Outlander there with the guys, and they actually have that battle. And in that battle, the British, who were also allied with quite a few Scottish clansmen, were able to come in. And at this point in time, they were pretty well versed in firing their muskets and canister shot. And when the two forces got together over the battlefield, the Scots, the Jacobites, they all discharged their muskets, and then they threw them on the ground and grabbed their longswords and their claymores and started running into this canister shot. So
that's going to be rough.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. Decimated about 95% of them were all slaughtered on that and there. And so what that brought apart was the English king at that point in time. He went ahead and banned the clan system, in so much as that he made it illegal to speak Gaelic, which is the native Scottish tongue. The tartans and the bagpipes all went by the wayside. And he also changed the communal land system from basically a community where you could have community grazing, you could shoot a deer for the pot, no one really cared, to a landowner-based system, or laird, so that means landowner. And the idea behind this is that, he would allow these people that, his allies, these Scott clansmen, became lairds, and they had their estates. Some estates were, or some of the clans were decimated through genocide because they were on the wrong side. So like the McDonald's, that was not a good thing to have a name named McDonald back then. They literally burned people alive in their homes. And then you got into this scenario where these guys, they wanted to generate revenue through their estates, so these lairds, and they had good friends down in England. Well, England, I'm sure you've been down there, is very, very fertile. Well, the Scottish Highlands is not fertile. Heather Moorland is not fertile. You can run a few cows, or you can run a few horses, you can run some sheep on them, but not much.
Pretty harsh terrain.
Pretty rough weather, a lot of rain, 60 inches of rain every year. So you end up in a scenario where these guys are hanging out with these other landowners, and they want to do the same thing they're doing because their kids are going off to Oxford and Cambridge, they're going on vacation in Paris, but they're not making enough money up there in these unfertile lands. And historically, these lands, the glen, the valley up there in the Highlands, had subsistence farmers on it. And the idea is that you wanted as many farmers up on the glen because there'd be a call, from the earl or whoever, hey, we need more men to fight this conflict. And so there would be a call on it. So you wanted men was, really what you wanted was soldiers. But now we're to the point where we want to generate revenue. And now all those people living up in that glen might generate less than £10 a year in rent. But, they got a quarter-acre lot, and they're trying to, eke out a living with a little crop, and they got a couple horses, maybe a few cows, maybe a sheep or two. They didn't really have a whole lot going for them. They were just literally subsisting. Now, the landowner said, hey, you know what? we can move these people into town. We can get them to teach a skill, maybe a vocation. They could be a cobbler or whatever else. They can live in a house that's a proper house, because these people, as subsistence farmers, are living in these stone houses with thatched roof. There's no trees, so all the beams that they have, they actually move them from house to house. And if you burn the house down, you're really screwed, because there's no way to put a roof on it anymore. And these are dirt floors. Matter of fact, the houses are designed, they call them black houses, and they're designed for your livestock to live with you at night, in order to keep you warm and keep them warm in the wintertime. And so they decided to move these people off. This was the start of what they call the highland clearances. And so we're talking, 1750s into the early, 1830s, 1840s. So you had a time period there where these landowners said, hey, if I move these people out, move them into town, I can move in a farmer who has 5,000 sheep, and I can get 800 pounds a year in rent. Okay, 8 or 10 pounds, 800. Well, it's not hard to do the math.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're trying to do what's right for these people, right? So it's a good thing. Well, some of these people have been on this land for, maybe hundreds, maybe 1,000 years, the families have been. They didn't want to leave, and so they were forcibly moved. In some cases,
story as old as time, man.
Yeah, in some cases they were given tickets, to the ship, and they said the ship's down on the dock, get on it. And these ships were sailing to Nova Scotia and the United States. Well, what was the colonies then?
Yeah.
And then became the United States. And so, that's where a lot of your, folks that have Scottish ancestry, that's where it comes from.
Forced immigration.
Forced immigration. Yeah. And not everybody, someone looked at, here's an opportunity for us to go someplace where we're going to have freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, things like that. So some of our relatives came over for that reason, but a lot of them were forced off the land and were literally cleared. And that's a big deal, right? You got some people here that have a better idea how to use the land. So we're going to clear the people that are on the land so we can do what we want to do. Now, don't forget that. So now we go through this time period in Scotland where World War I, World War II, well, actually, let me stop for 1 second. 1750, after the Battle of Culloden, the King of England also did a census of all of Scotland to look at trees. And they were able to determine that only 4 to 5% of the landmass had trees on it. And there's a reason for that. And most of those trees were trees that had been planted by man, by the owners of these estates and these castles, had planted them around their properties. And that map is still available online, so you can go look at it. And so there's not a whole lot of trees. And when you look at the long history of Scotland, 9,000 years ago, it was covered under glacial ice. It's a fact. So when the ice receded, plant life and animal life came in and colonized Scotland. And, of course, that's how the deer got there, the red deer and the red grouse and the plants and trees that are there today. But the place gets 60 inches of rain. Well, what the ecologists will tell you, when it rains that much in that particular environment with those kind of soils, those trees that were at one time might have been 70% landmass that was covered with it start to die off. And you get acidification of the soil. You end up getting an iron hard pan a couple feet underneath the soil. Those trees can't penetrate that with their roots. Mm-hmm. So you're in a scenario now where trees start to disappear from the land. You get this heather moorland that starts to evolve there, which is a bushy plant and other mosses and things like that to start to grow into that place. And this happens over the course of thousands of years. They figure that the trees probably were gone between 3,000 and 5,000 years ago. So that beautiful Scotland you talk about with the craggy peaks and the granite outcroppings and the rolling, beautiful, the heather when it's in bloom is this purple color that everybody wants to see in the summertime. That is the wild, natural Scotland. That's how Mother Nature intended it. That's the way it's evolved over thousands of years. And so now we're in a scenario that they started to plant some trees in World War I, World War II, war effort. They created their own timber industry. It was all subsidized by the government. Back in the 1980s, 1990s, there was a third movement to continue this because, trees grow really fast when it rains a lot. They're not very sturdy trees.
I didn't know they grow faster when it rains a lot.
Oh, yeah. So, lots of moisture over there. And so these trees, I've literally been out to where they've cut these trees down, and the first tree in these tree plantations the rings are 1/2 inch to 1 inch wide.
Damn.
And the first 10,
like
20 years.
Growth spurt.
Yeah, it's majorly growing. So, but here's the other thing. These trees that they're growing, that they're planting there are Sitka spruce, Doug fir, and larch. Now, I don't know if that's familiar to you here in Montana.
Names.
Yeah, well, those are prominent species here in Montana. Those are all non-native trees to Scotland. Those have all been brought over the ocean by humans and planted there because they grow really fast in that scenario. They don't do really well. When they get super old, they all blow over and you have all kinds of blowdown, which is another story. But so you've got this scenario going on where they started to plant these trees and pine plantations, which is subsidized by the government, so landowners can make some money off of it. And then you get to 2000. And you've got a group of people that decide that they think that all this management of the land, in the case of the keepers, what they're doing is they're managing the land for the sporting estate. So a sporting estate is, back when you go back to Queen Victoria, when you had this clearance of all the land, you ended up having a lot of wildlife that filled the space because there wasn't anybody out there shooting the deer or shooting the red grouse, and nor did you have a bunch of people catching the salmon out of the streams. So now when you've got the Queen shows up, the sporting opportunities, to go out and pursue these animals was immense. It was really great. And because she went and did it, everybody else wanted to do it. So that's the start of the Victorian age of the sporting estate. And so you get all these people coming up on railroads, the term is toffs, coming from down south. And what they would do is they would lease an estate from a Scottish landowner. And the way the laws were written back then is that if you put improvements on this, say you built an estate house, it could be 40-some rooms, right? Or you build any outbuildings, then the landowner, there was a 20-year lease, and at the end of 20 years, the Scottish landowner had to reimburse you for the cost of that. Well, of course, these guys didn't have any money, so these landowners ended up giving their land over to these people that had leased it. And so that was a history of that. So you have this kind of idea what's going on, but these keepers were basically running these estates in so much as that they were trying to improve the quality of the opportunities to go hunting for the landowners and their friends. So in the case of the red grouse, that is a huge sore point there in Scotland right now. They do really intensive managing of these heather moorlands. So they do a mosaic of little quarter-acre burns, low-intensity burning, and they suppress the ground predators. So that's your weasels like stoats, rats, and foxes. And their whole job is to keep those populations down, to go ahead and do these small rotational burning, which is exactly what we do here in North America for wild quail, in Georgia and northern Florida, where you practice the same thing in those areas. You have really healthy populations of wild quail. Where you don't do them, those populations kind of dive off the head. And so these guys have been doing this for, close to 200 years now. And then also there was a fairly good population of red deer. And of course, the more red deer you have, the more opportunities you have to go out and hunt them. And so everybody, in some cases, probably had populations that might have been too large. But there was opportunities for people to go hunting and then fishing. The fishing was very good. So that's really, there's a whole culture, a whole community of people that were hired, these keepers, to work for the landowners. And they were given a house. They were given, all their utilities were paid for. They were given a salary, given vehicles and also stuff to use while they're working. And like I said, this has been going on for a long, long time. You get
stewards of the land.
Stewards, yeah, absolutely stewards of the land. And not all of it positive, like say raptors, are avian predators for a long time until I think there was a law enacted in the 1970s in Scotland, similar to what we had to do in this country. People, they persecuted raptors because those raptors were eating their grouse, and the more grouse that was on the landscape, the more opportunities for the landowners and their friends to shoot the grouse. And of course, the more grouse they shot, the more happy they were. And of course, these guys today are subsidizing some of these highly intensely managed grouse moors to the tune of 300-400 to upwards of $1 million a year out of their own pockets. So, because that's what it takes to run a grouse moor. And so that's what we've had historically going on. Now, turn of the century, 2000, we have this group that comes out of the cities, this urban movement to, they don't like landowners. And they don't like the people that work for landowners. And they don't like what the landowners are doing on the land, so they have decided that they can push this effort, what they call rewilding. Again, we talked about letting nature be free, but their idea is to basically make it so difficult for the keepers to work on the land and do conservation work, again, the wise use of a natural resource, make it so difficult that the landowners stop subsidizing what's going on, or they go ahead and create and get the ear of politicians and create laws that make it illegal for them to do what they're doing. I mean, for instance, here in Montana, we can hunt, we can trap, we can snare. They made snaring illegal a couple months ago in all of Scotland. So that's a tool that a keeper can use to, mostly it's to manage the red fox. Now, they're not eradicating all the predators.
They're managing
Yeah, they're managing them, because if you have too many, I mean, let's face it, historically, if you want to talk about what populations of animals in nature, before we have this modern conservation model of which I'm talking about, that was enacted kind of guys like George Bird Grinnell, Teddy Roosevelt, late 1800s, the Boone and Crockett Club, where, we decimated our wildlife habitat and our wildlife here in North America. We figured out, hey, if we take care of it and we realize some sort of benefit being able to utilize it, guess what? We're going to have more wildlife. And so in this scenario over here, these guys, that's not a concept that the rewilders use at all. What they're looking at is like, hey, and what I've really come to understand is that this has nothing to do with science, has nothing to do with conservation, has nothing really to do with wildlife. What it really has to do with is the fact that they don't like the landowners. The keepers and their families are collateral damage, to the point where I actually use the word cultural genocide.
Why don't they like the landowners? Is it because they're never going to have an opportunity to own land themselves?
Well, I think you're hitting the nail almost on the head there. What I really think we have is it's a little bit of the have versus have-nots. Mm-hmm. Like I said, we haven't had a rebellion or a civil war in Britain in a long time, so there hasn't been an exchange of assets, let's say. So your generational wealth over in the UK is beyond anything we have by any means, even with our baby boomers passing away, and we're having the greatest movement of generational wealth ever in the history of our country right now. But I think what it is, it's this jealousy that these people have. We're going to go back 10, 12, I think 12 years ago. The rewilding movement and the people in the communities in the or the urban communities were able to enact a law with the politicians called the right to roam. The right to roam means anyone, you and I, anybody, can cross anybody's land at any time. Now, you can't hunt and fish on it, but you can get out and mountain bike on somebody's road down their driveway. You can, there's no private land rights like we have. There's no trespassing. So it's part of this. You've got a group of people, and let's go back in time, right? When we got you go back far enough in time in any Scots history, you're going to either have the oppressed or the oppressor. So you have this scenario where you've got people, let's face it, they were serfs. They worked for the landowners at some time in their history.
It's not unique to Scotland.
No, exactly. So, or any of us that have lots of Irish blood in you, like I do.
Or how about probably any civilization since the beginning of man?
Exactly.
There's the have and there's the have-nots.
Yeah. So, but now the have-nots have the political power in Holyrood, which is their parliament in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And because Westminster's given the Scottish Parliament enough power to enact local laws and do things like that, they've really been able to stick it to these landowners and to the people, like I said, the collateral damage on there. And some of the things I hear, so this film, to do a documentary justice, it's a combination of filmmaking, but it's also investigative journalism. You're literally going down these rabbit holes. You're kind of seeing where the story goes. And for me to make a believable story, you can't, if you don't tell everybody's story or let them all have a piece of the action here, you're creating nothing but propaganda. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to educate and inspire people. And by doing that, you tell, as a true journalist, you tell both sides of the story and let your viewer make a decision on what they think is right and wrong. So in this film, The Last Keeper, we have the sporting estates, we have some landowners, we have some keepers, we have people that benefit from working in that ecosystem, that environment, that economic model. And then we have some people that are kind of the kings of the rewilding side of things. We have the CEO of the John Muir Trust, which, interesting enough, he talked to me about the fact that he would like to have multi-billionaire foreigners come up and buy up all these estates, and because they have the money to build the infrastructure for tourism, to build lodges and trails and restaurants and all this stuff. And I looked at him and I said, and I was shocked, Andy, I said, "You're the CEO of the John Muir Trust. Did you ever read any of John Muir's writings?" And he looked at me, he's, well, and I said, well, John Muir absolutely abhorred the human footprint on the land, let alone building lodges. And he goes, well, we don't really have anything to do with him.
Other than using his namesake.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk about John Muir. John Muir moved away from Scotland and moved to Wisconsin when he was 11 years old. So I would think that Mr. Muir spent most of his life in America. His formative time periods. He probably doesn't remember a whole lot of time when he was in Scotland. But yeah, the John Muir Trust, which I do think most of their donations come from the United States. But that was one of the interesting little side bits here. And there will be a podcast with all these interviews. We put them completely on there, unfiltered and uncut, and let people hear the real story.
What you're describing is very similar to me when I listen to people talk about the decision, and it's not as large as rewilding, but the voting population in British Columbia, in Vancouver, voting that there should be no black bear hunting.
Grizzly bear hunting. Trophy grizzly bear hunting. Yeah, the
NBC.
NDP government came out and says, hey, and that's a good, and that.
It's the voting populace making a change to the regulations that really impacts almost everybody outside of the area where the voting populace is.
Yeah, I don't think in downtown Vancouver there's a bunch of grizzly bears running around, but and that's a case, and it's exactly what I'm talking about here. Our goal is to try to educate people about what's really going on. So yeah, if you politicize something that has to do with game management, types of hunting different species, and we're seeing this all over America today. There's a thing called IP3, which is a ballot initiative in Oregon where they want to make it an automatic felony to kill any animal, wild or domestic.
Like if you hit one accidentally with your car?
Well, you'd have to look at the fine print on it. But basically what they're saying is that if you are responsible for the harm.
Did you say Oregon?
Oregon.
Holy shit. There's a lot of animals to hunt there.
There's a lot of good hunting there.
Yeah.
But that, again, it's just like California. It's just like, King County and Washington State. Wherever King County goes, the rest of the other state has to go there because that's where the votes are. But here's the key thing about this IR3. They're going out, and of course, you and I both know that the cattle, the poultry, the pork industry, they got money. They've got the wherewithal. They're going to get this thrown out as far as it comes to domestic species, right? We've got to feed people. But when it comes to hunting, I can tell you, I've worked real hard to try to bring hunters together, and hunters don't work very well together.
Why?
I kind of liken it to the fishing hole syndrome is what I call it. You don't want to take somebody to your fishing hole because they might go fish it if you're not around. And unfortunately, what we've seen is, there's this mentality of kind of, a lot of these groups, these sportsmen's groups kind of want to protect their turf, want to protect their donor base, want to keep this thing going. It's about power and money, right? And it's no different than any of these organizations.
I would just literally, as you said it, I'm thinking, I'm like, God damn it.
Yeah.
When it comes to the human species, how many times can you not get to the root cause of the issue? And that's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, remember what I said about the quote about Ronald Reagan, right? All right. So, and I've had to use that many a time in front of people like this. And it's like, listen, who cares who gets the credit? We just need to make sure we leave this planet better than we found it. And when you're looking at things like this IR3 in Oregon, hunters aren't going to come together. Yeah, there are some efforts to try to, there's some people doing some good things. Mm-hmm. But again, here's what you got to think about. How many hunters are actually out there? And if you look at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service data on hunter license sales in America, only about 4 to 5% of the population buys a hunting license in any given year.
Yeah.
Okay? So let's just round it up to 10% for, argument's sake. That means when we have a political scenario, whether it be a politician that say, I'm going to ban this type of hunting for this type of animal, or I'm going to ban hunting completely, we're 40% plus one vote behind before we even get to the ballot box. And that's if all hunters show up to vote, and they don't. So it's a real serious issue here. So we talked about earlier about the perceptions around hunting. We talk about the ISIS terrorists. Well, you got all these people. Now, we've done the focus group research. 70 to 80% of Americans that aren't strongly for or against hunting are okay with hunting as long as it's done for the right reasons. And the number one reason, consumption. So when you're out there pushing, all these pictures of these dead animals or all these awards and all this other stuff and, the record book stuff, you don't look like you're doing it for for consumption. When people start thinking about hunting and they see you with a dead animal, they just envision you cut its head off and you left the rest of it out there in the field.
The grip and grin photo?
Yeah, the grip and grin photo. And they don't realize that every single state, every single, every province in Canada has wanton waste laws. You can't do it. Matter of fact, I've talked to state troopers campers in Alaska where they've said, hey, if we're flying around in a helicopter and we come up to a caribou kill, and if we go over there and we can cut a 1 liter bag, plastic Ziploc bag worth of meat off it, we're going to cite you.
Yeah.
It's serious stuff.
It's the same way in Montana. There's
Yeah.
law and waste laws for sure. And
Yeah.
also for the hunters, once they understand how delicious the game is, don't leave the leader behind.
Yeah,
You know?
no, it's not. Well, it's not worth it because
No.
it's such a great thing and it's so good for us. But what I've saw in Scotland is this war over land use, and it's literally being used as a cudgel to destroy this culture. And you'll talk to the rewilders. They want everything to nature to be free and the trees to be free. We just want the trees to be able to grow. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. So we got guys here that have been managing this land for, in many cases, this has been managed for many hundreds, if not thousands of years. You have a group of people who've decided they want to eradicate this effort by, in the case, planting trees. Well, in order to keep the red deer population of trees, they have to put up fences. And then because they don't like the deer, they kill the deer. Deer are evil. Deer eat trees over there. Well, their deer, their red deer, their native red deer is very similar to our elk here in Montana. They're woody browsers during a certain time of the year. Now, I also have to remember, I talked about the fact, even in 1750, long before the Industrial Revolution, and nobody was cutting trees down before that, not at a wholesale industrial scale, there was no trees in Scotland because it's evolved that way. So now you're planting trees, and if you're a deer who's evolved for thousands of years on the moor with no trees, they survive, they get along fine. Matter of fact, the biggest problem for red deer there is hypothermia. It rains so much, and if it stays really cold but not cold enough to create snow, they don't get any insulation. They can literally die on the hill. They don't die from starvation. They die from the environment.
Are they similar to stag?
Well, it is. So the male red deer is commonly called a stag.
Okay.
So if somebody says we're going to go stag hunting or red deer stag
Gotcha.
hunting, that's what they're talking about is the red deer.
Yeah, they have a lot of similarities to an elk for sure.
Yeah. So in the wintertime, hey, there never used to be trees there, but now there's a tree there. The weather sucks. What are you and I going to do? We're going to go duck in the pine trees, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This monoculture, say that. It's a monoculture that absorbs heat and
Gives you a little bit of shelter from the elements.
Yep, it does that.
Blocks the wind.
Yep, it does that. And so, but if there's a bunch of young saplings in there, what does the deer come on? They pluck those saplings off, the tops of those things. And of course, that is where the apical merisome, where the tree grows from. And so, of course, you stunt the growth of the tree. So if a guy's got a timber forest that he's just growing in order to get timber, well, it pisses them off. So they want to keep the deer off, so they fence it off. But if you're a rewilder, we can't have that at all. We need the trees to be free. So let's kill off all the deer. So we actually...
It's an interesting value
Yeah,
proposition.
matter of fact, the Scottish government has a £30 million budget this year, 2025 or 2024, to kill off as many red deer as they can. Now, I have driven probably 4,000 to 5,000 miles over the course of a year and a half. I spent about 140 days in Scotland over the course of a year and a half working on this film, driving 4,000 to 5,000 miles. I've been more places than most Scots have. I haven't seen 20 deer off the road. Now, are there pockets where there's lots of deer? Yeah, but for the most part, there's not enough deer. And so you have this whole group of people, these keepers here, that part of their living is stalking deer and taking clients out. So if there's no deer because your next door neighbor is a John Muir Trust and they got a permit from Nature Scott to kill everything at night, and all the big stags, they go kill all the big stags, the males, they seem to target those before they target any of the hinds, the females, which is what you would want to target if you want to control a population. But they're off killing all the stags. Well, that pretty well screws this young guy over here who's managing the land to take people stalking.
And it can't be unwound quickly either.
No, that takes years and years and years for these animals to
You could
develop.
eradicate that species in a year, and if you down the road realize that you had gone down the wrong path and needed to reverse course, that's not a...
Yeah, the only way you're going to change it is, as we've seen in many places of the world, you've got local extinction.
Yeah.
So the only way you're going to do anything to bring back those animals is to physically bring that back.
Do you think that the rewilding crew has malicious intent, or do you think that they just deeply believe in their ideology?
Well,
Because their ideology is including killing certain species that they seem to value less.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think what I've come to understand firsthand, talking with them, interviewing them, seeing the land, seeing what the results are, seeing what cause and effect, I don't think this has anything to do with wildlife. I don't think it has anything to do with the land, in so much as that it's a just deep-seated animosity towards landowners, and they just want to have control and power over the land. If you take a piece of ground, let's say you've got a ranch here in Montana, and you bought it because there was elk on it, and let's say that the elk disappear, or something, your neighbor killed them all, just blew them all away, and the elk are gone. Next year you go out to hunt elk, there's no elk. Next
I'd
year
be
you go
hunting
out.
him next year.
Yeah, but my point is, you go out 2-3 years. Now you've invested a lot of time and money in this, right?
I know. I spent all the millions I don't have on this ranch that I don't own.
Yeah. Well, whatever. Maybe it's your buddy's ranch, but the reality is now you can't utilize that resource.
Yeah.
And let's say you're putting, like I said, 200-300, maybe 500,000 pounds, maybe 1 million pounds, and you no longer can utilize that to recreate the way you want to recreate. So are you going to put that kind of money in it? No. All right. So this keeper right here, he gets a house. He gets job, payment. His kids go to school. If he can't do his job, does he have a house anymore?
No. But like the haves and the have-nots, that's the story of humankind. Why is it reaching this tipping point now, do you think?
Well, I think in the name of Scotland here and what's going on, like we talked about the right to roam, we talk about these perceptions around all this stuff. I do think it's a real basic. I don't think this is a real difficult deal. It's exactly what you're saying. It is a scenario where people want to feel that they're in control of things, that they want to do this. Now, of course, the ringleaders of this, I'm not talking about this as the whole population, but it's a ringleaders. I mean, let's face it, you don't get these people creating these scenarios without someone taking the initiative to go out there and say, you know what? We need to get the politicians to ban this or stop this. Of course, the other thing that's going on is we're talking about climate change. So you have a scenario in Scotland where they are having warmer winters, less snowpack. They are having a real problem with tick loads on some of their wild birds, especially the red grouse, where you get so many ticks in the spring on these chicks when they're born, they literally claw their eyes out and blind themselves.
No shit.
Yeah. I mean, it's real. It's really happening.
Wow.
And they're getting more rain versus snow, which is having an adverse effect on the red deer, making it much harder for them to survive. So there are some real issues there. But, getting to this, one of the things on the global warming idea behind these rewilders is that you've got a lot of estates that are being sold for the idea of working in the carbon credit scheme, trading scheme. I talked about the fact these lands are
carbon offset.
Carbon offset, yeah. So when I'm talking about these lands where they're not very fertile. Okay, but because they're not very fertile, they're a lot cheaper than buying the farmland down below. So you've got multinational corporations that are coming in and buying up these sporting estates at rock bottom prices compared to the other land, and they're firing everybody. They're allocating the homes and whatnot, because some of these estates will have dozens of homes on them, and they're subdividing them off and selling them to the highest bidder. And then they're going up on the landscape, this heather moorland. Now, this heather moorland we talked about, it's evolved over thousands of years. It's the wild part of the highlands. What they're seeing, what they're doing is they're getting subsidized. They're getting millions of dollars from the government, the Scottish government, to plant trees on these things. Now, the trees they're planting, for the most part, are these trees I talked about. They're non-native trees they're native to America, North America, and what they're doing in order to plant them is they're taking track hoes and excavators and driving up on this heather moorland. Now, this heather moorland, these ecosystems, they're considered an ecosystem of concern according to the UN. 60 to 70% of the world's heather ecosystems exist in the UK, most of it in the Scottish Highlands. So it's an ecosystem of concern. We're driving excavators and track hoes, and they're digging holes in order to break through that iron hardpan that I discussed earlier.
I was going to say.
Because you can't plant the tree, the roots won't make it through the iron hardpan, so you go ahead and break up. So I've flown my drone and filmed this, and it looks like southern Ukraine. It looks like literally, artillery's gone off for weeks. Just hole after hole after hole just on top of each other. And when you get down on ground and you look at the stuff after it's rained, which it does all the time in Scotland, the dirt's reddish orange. It's rusted. So I know what the ecologist is telling us is true. So we have an ecosystem of concern. We're planting non-native trees. Matter of fact, the ecologists tell us within 10 years, the predominant tree species of Scotland will be the Sitka spruce. And the government, the taxpayers, are paying these companies, subsidizing them to plant these trees. And then they're turning around and they're going over to...
What do you got, Michael? What are you doing?
Nothing. I'm just looking up this Heather Moreland stuff.
Well, yeah, pull that shit up there. Let's look at it. And all under the guise of carbon offset.
All under the guise of carbon offset. So Boeing or whoever, can go ahead and offset the amount of pollution that they're creating by supposedly, getting more carbon sequestrated by planting trees. Now,
Boeing needs to make sure their fucking doors don't come off in flight.
Well,
dude, I read an article the other day. There was a 757 getting ready to go from Atlanta, and one of the nose wheels just rolled off.
Well, it could be a maintenance deal, too. Let's not get too hard on them. So.
Oh, fuck that.
Yeah.
It's all Boeing's fault. I have no idea how that works. I'm assuming there's Boeing people doing Boeing maintenance. Let's just say that they really need to have a good news cycle.
Yeah. I think you don't want to own shares in Boeing right now.
I read that article, and that was my first move. I'm like, I wonder if it's having an impact. And there was this huge dip when the
door came off.
The door came off. Yeah. Went right back up.
Well, they make a lot of planes, so
they do.
So it's not just 737.
They could use a good news cycle, though.
But
Boeing, get your shit together.
So you have this scenario, though, where you've got these corporations that are being able to, plant trees. They get paid to plant the trees, and then they get the carbon credits on top of it. Now, the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen did a study, their scientists, of these trees that are being planted here, and they found in that 40-year cycle that those trees are being planted, there's actually a net loss in carbon sequestration. Because if you take the first 6 inches of Heather Moreland, which is all peat, that right there can hold probably as much or more carbon than any rainforest in the world.
We are, as again, a species so fucking myopic on the things that we think that we know and how much control we can have. Mm-hmm. We can't, stop or change the way that we travel. And I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but here's what we'll do. We'll plant trees to the exclusion of the natural habitat and tell ourselves that we're doing a good job, even though the ground that we are destroying can offset the carbon even more than the trees that we're planting, but the trees make a better picture or a piece of paper in a year-end statement. Look at what our organization is doing. We are so goddamn dumb.
Oh, it's the ignorance is unbelievable, and it's like if you had tried to do something like that, and here, like what they're doing in Scotland with this tree planting scheme and carbon sequestration. Yeah, we have it here, but if you were to go to an ecosystem of concern, I guarantee you, within hours, every environmental group in the United States would be suing you. But over there, because it's a landowner that has it, and they've kicked off all of the sporting estate people. Yeah, they just turn their head. They don't care.
I mean, we have kind of our own issues here in the United States. I mean, whether it's outsourcing water to Saudi Arabia and lowering the water tables of places in Arizona, or the amount of crops that we outsource externally while kind of ignoring what we have going on internally, the amount of farming land that we have owned by, foreign nationals or even just countries in our own backyard. Like, it's wild. People aren't really focusing on those things, but I agree with you. You go try to an area of concern, and you would have people throwing lawsuits as fast as you possibly could.
Yeah, well, the whole thing about food, that's another thing. You live here in Montana, you've traveled around here, and you get over the other side of the Rocky Mountain front, and you get down to I-15 going east. You can go for, close to 100 miles? It's one continuous wheat field, dryland wheat. There's no wildlife habitat. There's very few wildlife. Maybe a few coolies might hold some deer.
Some little antelopes out there.
There's a few antelope. Yeah, might be a few out there. But, that's the impact we have. And one of my buddies is an outfitter over in Hinsdale. And, they farm about 13,000 acres. And I said, where's your wheat go? And he says, well, we send it all goes to Japan for high-end bread products.
Yep.
So, we're the breadbasket of the world, and we're shipping this all over the place. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but...
Have you heard about how many Montana cowboys are being paid to go over to Russia?
No, I haven't heard about that one.
They are doubling and tripling down on their agriculture. And they are hiring Montana cowboys to come out there and basically facilitate the entire thing. Because I think we can all agree climates change. I think what nobody can agree on is exactly what is causing the change and how much of a role that humans have. But I guess, looking at Russia, there is a little bit of a melt-off. So historically, the lands that would not be farmable are starting to move northbound a little bit, and they are just doubling down on agriculture, and it's our Montana boys that are going over there and are just cowboying shit up in wherever Stan.
Yeah. Can we do that, though, in this day and age? Because I think with all the government regulations and all the stuff going on because of the war in Ukraine, I mean, because we have people that said, hey, I want to go hunt snow sheep over in far eastern
Can we do
Siberia.
what?
Can you go over there and do that? I mean, can you?
They are just hiring people with the expertise and bringing them into Russia.
Wow.
And I'm sure paying them whatever they need to double down on their agriculture. And if you look at the size of that continent or how much landmass Russia actually has, what's usable now, but shit, what might be usable in 100 years? You want to talk about turning the tables on agriculture and who actually might become the world's leaders when it comes to agriculture? They got more land than we do.
Yeah, quite a bit more land, that's for sure. But even China, I mean, I've spent a fair amount up there over the years, and they run this big planting boom. I mean, you drive around in China, I mean, even along the highways there, and those those corridors are just, I mean, it looks like a nursery.
Yeah.
All these things stacked together, and they've got all these stakes and everything's braced in and all this other stuff. I mean,
And they
it's
also
crazy.
have high-rise cities that have nobody in them as well.
Yeah, well, that's
Some weird shit
I've
going on
actually
in China.
I spent 8 days in Wuhan before the whole COVID deal.
So you were who brought COVID to
Yeah,
Montana?
no, this was 2016, so it's 2017, so I think we're okay with COVID.
Sure.
But,
Allegedly, it was 2016.
Yeah. Well,
You might have
it
been
didn't originate there, It was all, came from a bat, right?
Oh, God. Yeah. Well, it did originate, whether it be from the wet market or the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I think isn't the consensus that's kind of where the nucleus was for that?
Yeah, that's where the people went to the hospital that were sick, so they didn't go to the market. They were working in the lab.
But we don't support gain-of-function research here in the U.S., except for the fact we definitely funded it through the NIH.
Yeah. It was Mr. Fauci, right? So I think we've all kind of heard that now. But yeah, no, it's there's a lot of things that are changing in this planet. But the key thing, I mean, do we want to leave this better for our kids, great grandkids?
I think that's the best we can do. Somebody was asking me the other day, what would you want your mark on the world to be? And I kind of land on that. I would rather be known as somebody who added more than they subtracted. We all subtract to a degree. I mean, we can't live as a species without it being at the cost of other life. And I don't care if you are the most idealistic vegan or vegetarian or whatever it is. Like, live your life however you want to, but you have some blinders on if you think that any of us are living in a way that doesn't have a consequence to a species downstream. I would rather add more than I subtracted. And I don't know what that looks like. I mean, maybe that's through information. Maybe it's through having conversations and educating people about the value of conservation and what the hunter's role is in that conservation, because that one is lost. And I will say, though, the hunting community's biggest enemy is the hunting community.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's like I said earlier, 5% of the hunters put out 95% of the bullshit, and unfortunately, we propagate it. And again, we talked about commerce, talk about capitalism. I'm not against any of that, but how do you differentiate your bow and arrow, your optics, your bullet, or the hunt that you're offering as an outfitter? Well, if I can show that Joe got 5 Boone and Crockett trophies on my ranch or using my products, well, then that gives me a natural ability to differentiate my product from the competition. And that's what I've seen over, hunting historically has always been what I call a biocentric approach, right? We've provided food and camaraderie, traditions, and that's the stuff I grew up with. But I've watched over 4 decades, 5 decades now as being a hunter and not being in that industry until, probably the last 10 years or so, 15 years, just being it from the film side, what I do, and just kind of watching what happens. And it's kind of morphed more into what I call more of an egocentric approach to hunting, where it is about those record books. It's about collecting animals. It's about one-upping the other guy, and that's a natural human thing we do. So how do we change it? Well, we have to start looking at where the price tag, where the money is. And if you don't want to have a whole bunch of really schlocky TV productions, which is outdoor television for the most part, you don't pay for them. I mean, as a filmmaker who's worked in Hollywood, who's worked in major episodic television, you show me a genre of television that has 286 hunting TV shows, not fishing, hunting TV shows between the Outdoor Channel, Sportsman's Channel, and Pursuit Channel, which
That's insane.
I did a survey of that some years ago.
286 between those three channels?
286,
That's
between
insane.
those three channels. And that doesn't include the Hunt channel on YouTube or something else out
Holy
there.
shit.
And so what you have is a scenario where, because the cost of the barrier to getting involved in television today in that world, if you got 10 guys together back when the Outdoor Channel started, you could buy bandwidth on a satellite for $1 million. Okay, get 10 guys at 100,000 apiece. Okay, now we've got the Outdoor Channel. We'll resell that to a bunch of guys who want to be outdoor television celebrities, and we'll sell it to them for $5,000 a week. Okay, you do the math.
Yep.
If I get 100 of these guys,
Yep.
I'm making money.
You're doing real well.
I'm doing
actually.
really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's enough guys out there that want to do that want to get quote unquote paid to get hunting and fishing. And it was funny growing up with an outdoor writer for a father. My dad says, everybody makes this claim that I get paid to go hunting and fishing. And he says, by the time I research my articles, go out and interview people, go out and shoot the pictures, write the article, edit everything, do all the other bullshit I got to do, I might spend 5% of my year in the field. No, it's pretty quality time.
For sure.
But again, it's not a whole lot of time. But we have this whole world out there now where, you get all these what we call wannabes that, if you gave me, if you gave me $500, I could get you on television tomorrow, probably.
Or do you even need television? You go to YouTube. You go to these platforms that you stream for whatever it may be. I mean, they are definitely a competitive marketplace for traditional media sources.
Yeah, no, 100% on that. I think what I'm trying to get to here is that when we talk about a genre, with the way production really works in television and stuff, you look at a Blue Bloods, one of these cop, mystery shows. How many of those are produced every year? Even these
197, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, no, but I guarantee it's less than a dozen.
God, I hope so.
But even these ghost things, this paranormal stuff. I mean, there might be a dozen, 15 of them produced.
Yeah.
That's across the whole spectrum, right? But to have close to 300 TV shows, my point is that it's a little bitty industry, and there isn't enough money within that industry for any one of those people to produce something decent, unless you're, say, Jim Shockey, who's built a phenomenal business model where he's able to generate some serious revenue from people. But at the end of the day, if you don't have enough money to produce good content, I like to say good shit in is good shit out, and bad shit in is bad shit out. And that's what I've seen when we watch a lot of this stuff. And it's representative of all hunters. That even though you may not like outdoor television, you don't watch it, whatever else, it still represents all of us that hunt, because that's what the broader public says. And we talked about earlier, only 4 or 5% of the population hunts. Hunting is not a right. It's a privilege. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights. I think firmly that our founding fathers couldn't fathom that we'd never be restricted from hunting.
Yeah.
It's just, but they knew that King George might take our guns away, so that's why we have the Second Amendment. But I think if they had ever had a crystal ball, they would have added an amendment to hunt for sure.
They did a pretty damn good job. I just don't think they could have forecast, the size of our country at this point from a population perspective. They did pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean, as
100%.
there's no framework that's ever going to be perfect. For some guys that were not professional politicians, they put some pretty good shit together.
Well, and the fact that they were under the gun and they could have got shot and killed as treason, being treason.
Yeah.
So, I think they did pretty good. So,
what do you got your eyeball on next? So you got this thing up, where you said it's on Prime. You have this.
Well, so The Last Keeper just went out to the film festival circuit.
Okay.
So it's if anybody wants to see the trailer for it, if you go to shepherdsofwildlife.org/keeper, then you can go and watch the trailer for it. It's going to start to, we're on all the social media stuff, so Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff, or X, whatever they call it now. But stay on top of. You can stay on top of film festivals. But we're going to end up. We produce a feature film for the festivals, and then we also do an hour-long production for PBS. We work with Valley PBS in Fresno, and then they'll make it available to all 330 PBS stations around the corner. That'll happen this fall, and then we also do a 30-minute educational version, which is for the corporate boardroom, classroom settings, and then also political screenings. And we've had some tremendous success with our last film. We've actually screened that film in the U.S. Capitol with congressmen, congresswomen, and senators.
That's awesome.
We've been able to meet with the upper leadership of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is the people that kind of coordinate the trade of wildlife here in the United States and abroad. Worked with the Secretary General of CITES, which is the international treaty that oversees all flora and fauna trade, all your hunting trophies, They're the ones that oversee all that and decide whether or not it's something that could be traded or not. And then we've been able to be in Westminster. Matter of fact, last year there was an effort, a private member bill, to ban the importation of all hunting trophies, like 7,000 animals or species, which, there's only about 500 and some odd species in the Safari Club record book, so it's kind of a crazy number. But there's the UK is not a bastion of hunters. They don't have the hunting culture we have. They don't have the rights we have either.
That's for sure.
And so, this was going to be an easy thing for them to pass through there. But killing the shepherd, that educational version, I literally heard an MP that had spoken out against the bill in January last year. And I sent him a cold email. A friend of mine gave me his email, so I sent him a cold email with a link to the film. And, I'm not a constituent. I'm not even a citizen of the UK, so there's no way this guy's going to, take and watch this thing. But I'll be damned if he didn't watch it. And that afternoon texted me or emailed me back, and we went back and forth. The next day I was on the phone with his staff, and we were making plans. I had to finish up some filming and for this film we did in Scotland in February. So we made a plan for me to come down and do a screening in Westminster, which we ended up spending some time in Westminster. And I was able to sit down with some lords and some other folks and some academics and whatnot that were friends of mine, and we put together a small little group that derailed that bill and put an end to it. Now they've brought it back again here for this next year. But, really the key thing that people have to understand, we've talked about these rural communities being good stewards of the land, being good shepherds and taking care of them. They have to see some sort of benefit. It's usually economic. But what people don't really understand, and I think they really don't see, is that benefit provides for the most basic human rights of these people. A good paying job to feed your family, an opportunity to have access to health care, and an opportunity for your children to get an education. I mean, we run entire political campaigns for the President of the United States on those three platforms. Why does not the fellow Godfrey Mwimbi in my film Killing the Shepherd, he's the head game scout of Kapanda in Zambia, why doesn't he have a right to have a good paying job and have the opportunities for his family that we take for granted? Why doesn't this keeper, Scott McKenzie, in the Isle of Skye, who's the last employed gamekeeper taking people hunting on the Isle, which is it's one of the largest islands in Scotland, has a long storied history of sporting estates and hunting. Why would he not have an opportunity to be able to raise his kids the way that he has and have them see, maybe even take on the mantle of a gamekeeper of that estate?
People are too wrapped in their own shit to care, man.
Yeah, well, the thing is when we start talking about human rights, that does change the stuff. Because most of the folks that are anti-use, anti-hunting, for them, it's about Me Too, Black Lives Matter, human rights. Yeah. And these films, in many cases, tick off all those boxes. It's like, come on, guys, this is hypocrisy. These people have every right that you do. They see a benefit from taking care of the wildlife. Their wildlife doesn't live in your backyard. You don't take care of it. So I think it's pretty important that we start to realize that this big world that's out there, because it still is a big world.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of shit going on. And we have to understand that decisions we make every day do have a downstream effect. And I think that if we start to consider what these people get and we don't vilify hunters or hunting, I mean, let's face it, the reason why you have birds in your, in your bird feeder, deer and turkeys in your backyard, the reason why you have national forest, it's because hunters who go hunting. They pay for it. They pay for the conservation, the biology.
The money from tags.
Yeah, they pay for the protection, game wards, protection of the resource. So I think it's really important people understand that hunting is a very critical part, because all these things are going to continue as long as we take care of them. Now, the biggest threat to all that is us, like we've been talking about earlier. It's humans. We destroy habitat. If we have to have more people, we have to feed more people. We need to destroy more wildlife habitat. And I mean, I love sitting in a room with a bunch of people that says, well, I think it's terrible that you hunt and whatever else. And I'm like, okay, great. Well, you got a table at your house? What's it made out of? Wood? Okay, well, that was wildlife habitat. Oh, you live in a subdivision in suburbia. Well, I guess that was wildlife habitat. Hell, downtown New York was a wildlife habitat at one time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wildlife now, but it's definitely used
different
to be.
Type of hashtag wildlife.
Yeah, exactly. So
what's next in your quiver?
Well, that's great. So,
I
I spent a lot of time traveling around the world doing stuff, and obviously being here in my own backyard, there's a lot of issues here in Montana, land use issues. A lot of stuff eerily echoes what we're seeing in other parts of the world. And so we've started production on a film called The Real Yellowstone, and it's about multi-generational ranching families and their relationship.
Does it star Kevin
with land.
Costner?
No, it doesn't star
Damn
Mr.
it.
Costner. No, I don't think so. I've had somebody say, hey, do you want to meet him? I'm like, Yeah, whatever.
Maybe he's a nice guy. Who knows?
He's a hunter.
There you go.
By the way, yeah, he's a hunter. So, but yeah, the story, it allows these multi-generational people that to tell their story about their relationship on the land and what goes on and how it works for them. And unfortunately, it is so difficult to be a rancher in this day and world that I'm not sure that some of these ranchers are going to be able to have their next kin, their next generation of kin run these ranches, because you got market issues, you got real estate issues, you've got the cattle market industry. I mean, there is no, for instance, there is no big slaughterhouses here. Mm-hmm. So these guys have got to truck this stuff out. But
I mean, you lose a multi-generational operation, what does that get replaced with? I mean, you can't get that back.
No, you can't. You can't. Well, one, you can't even buy a ranch and make it pencil out in this day and age. So
not without subsidies.
Well, there have to be some pretty big ones when you're paying tens of millions of dollars for 10, 20,000 acres. It just doesn't jive. But here's the key thing for us: where does wildlife live? It doesn't live on top of mountains because they're covered under snow most of the year. They live on private ground down in the valleys where the land is fertile, on private farms and ranches. Most, if not all, wildlife lives there. So for this rancher to have 500 head of elk, whatever, eating his haystack, he better well see a benefit to having that elk there. Now that benefit can manifest itself many different ways. Mm-hmm. But if he has an outfitter that comes out and pays him $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 to bring some clients out there to hunt those elk, that might be the difference between, being the red and the black. Could be the vacation money. It could be many things.
The locals are going to hate you for that.
Well, but my point is this, though. But there's a lot of people that do a lot of different things for now. It may not be that. Yeah. It may be that they have their local, generations of families that come out where you have hunters who have a tradition of working with the ranchers, helping out with, sorting, helping out with brandings, helping out build fence if they know how to build fence, because most ranchers will tell you, I don't want any help in that department.
That actually makes sense.
Yeah. But then you have to look at it as there's a lot of different outcomes that these guys are looking for. But again, if they don't take care of the land, then it doesn't take care of the wildlife. And that's what we care about. We want to make sure that wildlife stays there. It's a very complex, very difficult scenario of different issues that are going on there. I mean, predator control. I mean, we've got grizzly bears up and down the Rocky Mountain front. We were talking about that earlier. I've got a young family that they've got a 14-year-old daughter that has bipolar disease, and they run a small spread. And cow-calf operators only get paid once a year, guys.
Yeah.
When they go ahead and sort their calves out in the fall and send them off to the market, depending on what those calves weight and whatever the market conditions are, that's what they get paid. And if they have a grizzly bear come in the springtime and kill 5, 6, 10, 15 of their calves, boy, every one of those calves represents, depending on the market, $1,000, maybe $1,500. Well, I don't know about you, but if you take a $10,000, $15,000 hit in your pocketbook,
yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough deal.
Yeah.
So, and again, they're looking at well, how do we keep this going for the next generation? So, but there's some great stories out there too. I mean, there's some guys doing some great stuff. I'm working with a ranch that's south of Cascade that's doing regenerative ranching, which is they're trying to mimic what the bison have been doing, what historically did with the land, because all this land evolved over thousands of years with bison on it. And
I was just I was driving back with my wife, and we were listening to Steve Rinella, the audiobook of his. I think it's actually called The American Bison. Mm-hmm. The description of the amount of bison. Not only, I would give anything to see a landscape with that many bison on it. And then it was just insane. Killing them only for the tongue and leaving the entire body. But then the hide became valuable. So they started taking them for that. And then the bones became valuable. Yep. Like, God, and you're never getting it back. I would have paid so much to see that.
Yeah, no, but it's not as pretty as the picture is painted.
No, I just want to see a lot of bison.
Yeah. Well, when you so what these guys are doing are putting 1,000 head on 100 acres for 24 hours.
Okay.
It looks like it's been
it's going to look like somebody had like a pair of shears down there.
Yeah. So here's what happens. When you put that much pressure, which mimics what herds of thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of bison, when you have that on the landscape eating up everything in this valley, when they walk out of there, like I said, it looks like it's nuked, but they've also shit and pissed everywhere. Yep. So now they've fertilized it. And all those plant life, that whole rhizome humus roots and everything about that. Well, when you go lift weights and you go put some extra weight on and you break down that muscle fiber, what do you get? You get stronger muscles, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens to that ground. Not only do you end up, and what these guys have been able to prove, and this has been proved by many folks, but what I've actually seen on the ground and we film, is you get a much more robust plant life, a lot healthier. It retains more moisture. They have zero soil exposed now. It's all covered in healthy, vibrant grasses and forbs. And matter of fact, on their property line, they've got some land that's part of a state wildlife refuge. And they had a fire on that state land, and it came across and hit the fence line and stopped because there was so much moisture inherently
natural
in the vegetation.
fire retardant,
yeah, it works out great. But so what we're going to be filming this summer is that they've got a few. They've actually gotten to the point where they can actually graze all winter long. They don't have to feed, but they do have a few pivots with alfalfa that they go ahead and hay. In their alfalfa hay pivots, I think there's 3 of them they have. They average between 2,000 and 3,000 head of elk in the summertime at night feeding on these things. And we're going to go in with thermal and film it with drones and thermal cameras on the ground. They figure about $150,000 worth of hay the elk eat. So if you're a rancher and you're taking $150,000,
that's a big check.
Big check.
Yeah.
And so but it's not their wildlife; it's our wildlife. It's part of our asset, our public asset. But they've done a really good job. They bring in resident hunters for a couple of weeks during the gun season. Interesting enough, you've probably heard of Onyx maps, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's got to have Onyx, so you know where all the private property is and public land and all stuff. And we've all heard the story of public land in holdings, right? Where you got big chunks of land. It's public. BLM,
Can't get
Forest
to it
Service
because it's landlocked.
Can't get to it, but guys like Randy Newberg down in Bozeman's figured out, hey, we can go ahead and hire helicopters and airplanes, and we
just
can land.
must wait 24 hours.
Yeah, got to wait 24 hours. Can't go hunting the same day. Well, 24 hours you fly. But the scenario that we have on this ranch is you've got public land. I mean, you got resident hunters that have, you call on a certain day on the 1st of September, you get a hold of the ranch manager, you won the lottery. You're one of 16 guys that get to go hunt. They've got big bulls, big elk on this place.
Oh, I bet.
And so you get to go out there and hunt. Well, it happened quite a few times. You're out there hunting, and here comes a helicopter with another resident hunter. Lands right on top of you. Yeah. So there's a lot of unintended consequences that come from some of these issues that we hear about, but
they're all complex is the problem. And nobody has time for complexity anymore. We have to solve problems at the speed of the internet.
Well, yeah, that's true. I've seen some people trying to make movies just using Google, but so it's a real issue. It's very complex, all the issues. But there's some bright stories out there, like what some of these people are doing to make sure the land's in good shape. We've got a rancher over in Winifred. There's also a hunting outfitter, and he ends up having the sheep. Quite often have the sheep tag, the governor's sheep tag, and that money that they get from outfitting. And he's hunting public lands for those sheep because they're down on the breaks, and it makes a big difference for their family. And but they're also supplying most of the choice cuts of beef to most of the top end restaurants in Bozeman between this guy and his brother. So there's some really cool stories out there, and our idea is to say, hey, you guys understand what these ranchers do and their responsibility to the land and the wildlife on it. And quite often these guys are, there are groups of people, including sportsmen's groups, that put a crosshair on the backs of these people as being the evil landowner, as the have versus the have-nots. And of course, we've had many, many years where in this state, Democrats, the political arm of things, have pushed access as one of their promises to vote for them. And unfortunately, what it's done is and I've had ranchers come and articulate at great length about this, it's emboldened resident hunters to the point where they look at that 6-point bull behind that fence or that gate and go, well, that's my bull. Yeah, technically it is until you shoot it, but you don't have possession of it, but it is a public asset. But you create this animosity. That's what it's done. And so you have all these scenarios where at the end of the day, the landowner's like, this particular ranch we're talking about with the elk there at night feeding, they don't allow any hunting of mule deer because the mule deer population is at historic lows right now. That's pretty much the case in most of Montana. And they had 8 different mule deer bucks poached off the county road on their land. And that's
again,
by
the biggest
resident
threat to
hunters.
the biggest threat to hunters is the hunting community themselves.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
So it's some great stories out there. It's called The Real Yellowstone. We're going to have that hopefully out by this time next year, and then we're on to some other projects. But there's always another story to be told about the land and the wildlife and the people that live with it.
It's a big, beautiful earth.
Oh, it is.
Where can people find more about your stuff? We've been at it for 2.5 hours. I got to get you out of here.
Shepherdsofwildlife.org.
Okay.
So that's the best
Normal
place.
spelling? Shepherds of Wildlife?
Shepherds, just normal. It's got 2 H's, guys, for you guys who don't know, but we also own both versions. So if you don't use the H, the second one, a lot of people don't realize that herds.
Fair enough.
SHEPHERDS of wildlife.org. And if you want to see the trailer for the film, which I'm not sure when we're going to broadcast this, but this is going to be out it's going to be going for several months now. If you go to shepherdswildlife.org/keeper, KEEPER, keeper. That'll get you to see our new film trailer for The Last Keeper, and of course we're on all the social media accounts. Everybody else is, but I want to say thank you for having us.
That's how we connected.
So, yep,
actually,
great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Bunch of people had tagged me. I was like, why the fuck have you and I not linked up?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think you and I were supposed to. We were going to do. I reached out to you some years ago. We're doing a mule deer project. And I'd reached out to you. Thomas Barker's on my board, and so he gave me your number, and so I reached out. I think you just couldn't work in your schedule. We ended up taking a Marine a guy named Mike Corsia.
I know who you're talking about. Okay,
so
I do remember that original reach out.
So Mike, I think he got blown up 7 or 8 or 9 times in Iraq. I think twice in one day, all IEDs.
That is unfortunate.
Yeah, but Mike's a hell of a guy, and we ended up taking over to eastern Montana. Did his first spot and stock hunt for a mule deer, and I'll tell you what, it was. He's got a collapsed lung. He's got replaced hips, everything's been replaced, and you got to be careful. But we had some wonderful time together, and he was able to take a really nice 5x5 buck.
That's awesome.
And special
for most,
thing
for most people to include people like that who have gone through all that, buck or not. It's about the experience, man.
Yeah.
And like you said, number 7, if it's even on the list.
Yeah. Well, we did it on Veterans Day, and he happened to bring a flag from Iraq, and we were on a ranch
that's a little bit too much. I mean, that's a little bit on the nose.
Yeah. It was pretty cool. So
yeah, that is an amazing thing.
Yeah. So
cool.
So it was good. And then just to finish this thing, you're the skydiver extraordinaire.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you probably don't know this. I'm the first guy to ever film someone base jumping on a snowmobile out of an airplane and off a cliff. So back
on a snowmobile.
Yeah, rented out. We did it over here west of town.
That would have been a skydive. The cliff would have been a base jump.
Yeah, base jump and then a skydive.
I'm assuming this was for a movie?
Yeah. I did a couple of extreme sport films called Sledheads. So the first one, we had a guy run out of a sky van over here west of town.
Yep.
And he drove that thing, and it was pretty wild. We only put a little bit of gas in the thing. And
Smartly smart.
Yeah. And when the nose would start to dive down, he'd give it a little bit of throttle and come back up and create a little gyro effect there. And then, of course, he jumped off.
And you need to exit the vehicle at some point in time.
When it hit the ground, it blew up. So it was a little interesting there because it was fire season.
Where'd you find a cliff you could take it off?
Well, cliff was interesting. It took us a long time. We ended up north of Revelstoke, British Columbia, and we had to find one that it was flat, right?
Yeah.
Straight down, 1,000 feet at least. And we literally got on helicopters and we flew all over. There's a guy named Brad Story. He passed away some years ago, but he was out of Utah. And this is one of the first guys to ever put a turbo on a Ski-Doo snowmobile, aftermarket turbo. So you basically take this stock sled and turn into a 400 horsepower, 400 pound sled. God. But he would go up he'd do these ascents up to these avalanche chutes. I mean, literally crazy stuff.
But on a rocket ship?
Yeah, totally. Well, going 80 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Up the hill. And if you stop, you're screwed because it's it's going to be a garage sale.
Yeah.
But we found this cliff and we set it up so you could jump off the thing and do a base jump. And
sweet.
And snowmobile actually started right up after we got down to the bottom.
No kidding.
Yep. We just had to turn it off because it was still running when it hit. Now pancaked all out.
Yeah.
But the only thing it broke on, I think, was the tail light. And of course, the skis were all pushed out like that. Everything. So
if you're a snowmobiler, don't do that because you're probably not going to have a base parachute on. And just because Tom said that only the tail light was out, you shouldn't expect that to be the outcome for you.
Yeah. You better have a lot of experience doing base jumps. So
yeah, it's not something that you should be a hobbyist in for sure.
Yeah.
It's either both feet in the bucket or to stay out of it.
Yeah, so I was on a helicopter, so I was all strapped in and harnessed in, filming it. It was pretty wild.
That's awesome, man.
But that was a long time ago in a film called The Sledheads.
The Sledheads.
Right. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time today.
No,
it's been
thank
great.
you.
Yeah,
It's been great. So
awesome.
We'll have to do some more.
I like it. Yeah, for sure.